They stopped the music before she even realized she had ruined herself. The orchestra died one instrument at a time. First the violins, then the cello. Then the low hum of conversation collapsed beneath the enormous crystal chandeliers of Ashbourne Hall until 200 members of London society stood suspended in complete and terrible silence. Seraphina Vale stopped walking halfway across the ballroom floor. Her slippers froze against polished black marble. Candlelight spilled across the white silk of her gown. Every face in the room turned toward her at once. She did not understand why. Not yet. The silence stretched too long. Long enough for panic to begin pressing cold fingers against her ribs. Somewhere near the champagne tables, a woman inhaled sharply. Another covered her mouth behind a lace fan. Seraphina felt the weight of their stares crawl over her skin like frost. "Dear God," someone whispered. "Who let her wear white?" Her stomach tightened. The winter ball at Ashbourne Hall was the most exclusive event in Northern England. She knew that much. Everyone knew that much. Invitations were whispered about for months. Noble families traveled hundreds of miles through December snow for a single evening beneath Duke Lucian Ashbourne's roof. But Seraphina had not belonged here. Not truly. 3 weeks earlier she had been living quietly in a narrow stone cottage outside Norwich with her Aunt Lydia and a dying garden buried beneath winter frost. She had owned 2 dresses. One gray, one white. The white dress was older than the gray one but better preserved because she almost never wore it. It had belonged to her mother once. Simple ivory silk with long sleeves and delicate pearl stitching along the collar. Elegant without trying to be. Tonight it had seemed like the safest choice. Respectable. Modest. Invisible. Invisible had always been Seraphina's talent. Until now. "Miss Vale." The voice came from beside her, thin and strained. Lady Beatrice Halloway gripped Seraphina's wrist hard enough to hurt beneath her gloves. "Why are you wearing white?" Seraphina blinked at her. "I did not know there was a rule." Lady Beatrice looked physically ill. "Oh no." The words came out barely audible. "Oh no no no." Murmurs spread through the ballroom like smoke beneath the door. Seraphina heard fragments drifting through the silence. She cannot possibly be that ignorant. Surely she did not know. The Duke will be furious. This is humiliating. Humiliating. The word landed like cold water down her spine. Seraphina's pulse stumbled unevenly in her chest. She looked around the ballroom properly for the first time since entering. The women wore jewel tones. Deep crimson, emerald green, midnight blue, silver, black, gold. Not one wore white. Not one. Her mouth went dry. "Beatrice," she whispered carefully. "What does it mean?" Lady Beatrice stared at her with the horrified expression of someone watching a carriage will roll toward a cliff edge. "At the winter ball," she said quietly, "white is reserved for the woman the Duke intends to marry." Seraphina felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. For one terrible second she thought she might faint directly onto the marble. The chandeliers overhead blurred. Heat crawled slowly into her face while the rest of her body turned cold. "That cannot be true." "It is. But nobody told me. Because nobody thought it was necessary." Lady Beatrice looked around frantically as whispers sharpened through the crowd. "No outsider has ever attended the winter ball before." Outsider. Yes, that part was true. Seraphina did not belong among these people with their diamonds and ancient bloodlines and careful cruelty polished beneath generations of etiquette. She was the daughter of a country pastor who had died with more debts than possessions. Her mother had passed years earlier from a winter illness that left the cottage unbearably quiet afterward. Since then Seraphina had lived gently and invisibly beside her aunt, sewing, reading, teaching children from nearby farms their letters for spare coins, existing carefully. Then Lady Beatrice's companion fell ill 2 days before the winter ball, and suddenly Seraphina found herself inside a carriage traveling north through snow toward Ashbourne Hall, because Aunt Lydia desperately needed the money Beatrice offered for temporary assistance during the social season. Seraphina had accepted because survival rarely arrived dressed as dignity. Now every aristocrat in the ballroom looked at her as though she had committed sacrilege. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Lady Beatrice swallowed. "That depends on the Duke." The name moved through the room before the man himself appeared. "Ashbourne." Serafina had heard stories long before she ever saw the estate rising black against the winter hills. Duke Lucian Ashbourne, the Iron Duke, widowed before marriage, cold, untouchable, dangerous in the quiet way storms were dangerous. Some said he had not danced in 6 years. Others claimed he barely spoke during public events unless absolutely necessary. There were darker rumors too, about a fiancé who died before their wedding beneath mysterious circumstances at this very ball years ago. About the Duke closing half the estate afterward and refusing every proposal placed before him since. No woman in London wanted his attention. Every woman wanted it anyway. The massive ballroom doors opened. Conversation disappeared completely. Even the servants seemed to stop breathing. Serafina turned instinctively toward the entrance. He stood framed beneath the dark archway like something carved from winter itself. Tall enough that the men nearest him suddenly appeared smaller. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black coat. Dark hair touched faintly with silver near the temples. Not old, just sharpened by difficult years. The candlelight caught against the severe line of his jaw and the pale scar disappearing beneath his collar. But it was his stillness that changed the room. He did not move quickly. He did not need to. Power settled around him naturally, the way cold settles over a lake before ice forms. Lucian Ashbourne looked across the ballroom once. Then his eyes found her. Serafina forgot how to breathe. It was not desire that struck her first. It was recognition, not because she knew him, because the look in his eyes carried the unbearable weight of someone who had once lost something important and never survived it properly afterward. The ballroom waited. Every noble in attendance stood frozen in anticipation of disaster. Serafina realized suddenly that she was expected to apologize, or flee, or burst into tears from humiliation. Instead, she stood perfectly still beneath 200 merciless stares, while the Duke watched her from across the room without expression. He began walking toward her. The crowd parted instantly. Silk whispered across marble. Men stepped backward. Women lowered their voices. Nobody blocked his path. Serafina's pulse thundered harder with each measured step he took. Lady Beatrice quietly released her wrist and retreated 3 paces away as if distancing herself from a public execution. Lucian stopped directly in front of Serafina. Up close he was worse somehow. Taller, colder. His presence pressed against the air itself. She could smell winter smoke and cedarwood clinging faintly to his coat. His eyes moved slowly across the white silk of her dress. Not hungrily, not warmly, carefully. The ballroom held its breath. "Your Grace," Serafina managed softly. He did not answer immediately. His gaze lifted back to her face. Gray eyes, sharp and exhausted and unreadable. "Who dressed you tonight?" he asked at last. His voice was low, calm. That made it more frightening somehow. Serafina swallowed. "I dressed myself." A faint murmur rippled through the crowd. Lucian's expression did not change. "Were you informed of the tradition attached to white at the winter ball?" "No, Your Grace." Another silence. Longer this time. Serafina could feel every aristocrat waiting for him to destroy her, to humiliate her publicly, to make an example out of the ignorant country girl who accidentally claimed a duke before all of London society. Instead he asked quietly, "If you had known, would you have worn another color?" "Of course." Something flickered behind his eyes then. Not amusement. Something sadder. More dangerous. He looked at her for another long moment while the ballroom drowned in anticipation. Then, very calmly, Lucian Ashbourne offered her his hand. Gasps broke instantly around the room. Serafina stared at him in disbelief. "Your Grace." The orchestra stopped, he said evenly. "That seems unfair to the lady." Nobody moved. Lucian's gaze shifted slightly toward the musicians' platform. "Play." The conductor nearly dropped his baton, scrambling to obey. Music exploded back into the silence all at once. Violins rose trembling into the candlelit air. Conversation remained dead. No one spoke while the Duke still stood before the girl in white. Serafina's heart pounded so violently she feared everyone could hear it. "I do not understand," she whispered. "No," Lucian said quietly. "You do not." Then he added the words that shattered the ballroom completely. "Come dance with me, Miss Vale." Across the room, Someone dropped a champagne glass. The music resumed, but the ballroom never truly recovered. Strings trembled through the air while 200 aristocrats pretended not to stare openly at the girl standing beside the Duke in white silk. Serafina could feel every eye cutting into her from every corner of Ashbourne Hall. The chandeliers above scattered golden light across polished marble floors and crystal champagne towers. But beneath the glitter the room felt colder now. Sharper, like a courtroom moments before sentencing. Lucian Ashbourne still held out his hand. Calm, patient, entirely unreadable. Serafina looked down at the offered hand as though it belonged to someone else entirely. Strong fingers, pale scars crossing one knuckle. No tremor, no hesitation. He did not appear angry. That frightened her more than anger would have. "Your Grace," she whispered carefully. "I think there has been some misunderstanding." "There has," he replied evenly. "Several, in fact." The orchestra continued playing. Nobody danced. Nobody dared move before the Duke did. Serafina became painfully aware of the silence surrounding them despite the music. It pressed against her skin from all sides. Somewhere near the center staircase, a woman muttered loudly enough to carry. "He cannot possibly intend to encourage this." Another voice answered softly. "Watch him." Lucian did not look away from Serafina. "Miss Vale." "Yes. If you continue standing there trembling, London society will mistake you for prey." Heat rushed instantly into her cheeks. She straightened before she could stop herself. Something faint almost touched the corner of his mouth, then vanished immediately. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. Slowly, carefully, Serafina placed her gloved hand into his. The ballroom inhaled as one. Lucian's fingers closed around hers. Warm, steady, possessive in a way that made panic ripple low through her stomach. He guided her toward the center of the dance floor without hurry. The crowd parted immediately. Women shifted aside in rustling silk. Men stepped backward with lowered eyes. Nobody blocked the Duke's path. Nobody ever would. Serafina became acutely aware of how small she looked beside him. She barely reached his shoulder. The white silk of her gown glowed beneath the candlelight while his black formal coat absorbed it completely. Winter and midnight moving together across marble. "I truly did not know," she said quietly once they reached the center of the floor. Lucian placed one hand lightly against her waist. Proper. Controlled. Yet somehow the contact sent another wave of whispers through the room. "I believe you," he said. "Then why are they looking at me like this?" His gaze lifted briefly toward the surrounding ballroom. Cold amusement flickered through his expression. "Because most of these people have built their entire lives around rules no outsider understands. And I broke one. You shattered one." The music swelled around them as he guided her into the first slow turn of the waltz. Serafina had danced only a handful of times before at village socials and harvest gatherings. Nothing like this. Nothing beneath chandeliers taller than houses while nobles watched with sharpened smiles and carefully hidden cruelty. But Lucian danced with impossible precision. Every movement effortless. Controlled. He led without force. Without uncertainty. She found herself matching him despite her nerves. "You dance very well," he observed after a moment. "I am trying not to fall." An admirable ambition. She glanced up at him despite herself. Was that humor? Barely. Another turn carried them beneath cascading candlelight. The orchestra regained confidence slowly. Conversations resumed in fractured whispers around the edges of the room. Yet the center of the ballroom belonged entirely to them now. Serafina could feel it. The weight of attention. The terrible intimacy of public scrutiny. "Who taught you?" Lucian asked. "My mother." The answer slipped out before she could stop it. His gaze sharpened slightly. "She danced before she married my father." Serafina hesitated. "She was not always poor." "No," Lucian said quietly. "I imagine she was not." Something in his tone made her look at him properly again. There was recognition there. Not of her exactly. Of the name perhaps. Or the past attached to it. Before she could ask, a voice sliced smoothly across the ballroom. "Your Grace." The dance slowed around them. Serafina turned instinctively toward the interruption. Lady Verona Blackwell stood several feet away near the edge of the floor, surrounded by 3 elegantly dressed women, who looked delighted by the unfolding disaster. Verona was beautiful in the cold, deliberate way marble statues were beautiful. Dark red velvet wrapped around her tall frame. Diamonds glittered at her throat like ice. She smiled directly at Serafina without warmth. What an unexpected surprise this evening has become. Lucien's expression flattened instantly. Lady Verona. Surely introductions are appropriate now. Verona's eyes drifted slowly over Serafina's white gown. After all, the entire ballroom appears desperate to understand the situation. Silence spread outward again. Serafina suddenly realized this woman terrified people almost as effectively as the Duke himself. Different methods. Same result. Lucien continued dancing. Then perhaps the ballroom should learn patience. Verona laughed softly. You see, that is precisely the problem. London has waited 6 years already. Several nearby nobles immediately pretended not to listen while listening desperately. Serafina felt tension tighten beneath Lucien's hand against her waist. Tiny, controlled, dangerous. Verona stepped slightly closer. It is quite unfortunate, she continued pleasantly, that your guest seems unfamiliar with Ashbourne traditions. Serafina forced herself not to retreat beneath the woman's gaze. I already explained that the mistake was mine. Was it? Verona tilted her head. Most women would research a ball before arriving dressed for a proposal. Heat crawled sharply through Serafina's chest. Around them came the faint rustle of entertained cruelty. This was what aristocrats truly loved. Not music. Not elegance. Public humiliation wrapped in perfect manners. Lady Verona, Lucien said softly. The warning in his voice changed the air instantly. But Verona merely smiled wider. I am only attempting to protect the young lady from embarrassment. Too late for that, someone murmured nearby. A few quiet laughs followed. Serafina felt them like tiny cuts beneath her skin. Lucien heard them too. His gaze lifted slowly toward the surrounding crowd. The laughter died immediately. Miss Vale is under my protection this evening, he said calmly. I would advise everyone present to remember that. Silence crashed down again. The statement moved through the ballroom like thunder beneath water. Serafina felt her pulse stumble hard in her chest. Under my protection. Not denial. Not correction. Protection. Verona studied him carefully now. That is a remarkably public declaration, Your Grace. You forced a public conversation. Did I? Yes. Lucien's voice remained perfectly even. And now you dislike where it has led. Verona's smile faded by 1 degree. Tiny. Nearly invisible. Yet Serafina sensed the shift immediately. This woman was accustomed to winning rooms. Lucien Ashbourne was one of the few men alive capable of denying her that victory. Forgive my concern, Verona said smoothly. I simply worried the girl might misunderstand what wearing white signifies here. Serafina swallowed. There it was again. Girl. Not lady. Not guest. A reminder placed carefully like a blade beneath silk. Lucien looked at Serafina then. Directly. Do you misunderstand it? He asked quietly. Her breath caught. The ballroom leaned toward them without moving. Every noble in attendance listening openly now. Serafina chose her words carefully because instinct suddenly warned her that this answer mattered more than she understood. No, she said softly. I understand now. His gaze held hers 1 moment too long. Something unreadable moved through his expression before disappearing again beneath cold control. Good, he said. The orchestra shifted into another movement. Nobody else had resumed dancing. The entire ballroom still revolved around them alone. Verona noticed it too. How extraordinary, she murmured. You truly intend to continue. The music has not stopped. Lucien guided Serafina into another turn. Conversation fractured sharply around the room as nobles finally began whispering openly again. He has lost his mind. No. Then what is this? I do not know. Look at him. Serafina tried to ignore them. She failed. I should leave, she whispered. Lucien's hand tightened slightly at her waist. No. Your Grace, this situation is becoming worse. For whom? She stared at him. For me, perhaps. Another slow turn beneath the chandeliers. But leaving now would confirm weakness. And staying confirms what? His gray eyes settled on her again with unsettling intensity. That depends entirely on what happens next. Before she could answer, the grand staircase doors opened above the ballroom. A servant descended quickly toward the Duke carrying a silver tray. His face had gone pale beneath the candlelight. Lucien stopped dancing immediately. The ballroom fell silent for the third time that evening. The servant bowed low. "Your Grace." Lucien took the folded note from the tray without expression. Serafina watched his face carefully as he opened it. Whatever he read changed something behind his eyes at once. Not shock. Something colder, older, dangerous. Lady Verona noticed it too. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Lucien folded the note once. "Precisely. It appears," he said calmly, "that someone in this house has decided tonight would be an excellent evening to reopen old graves." A chill moved visibly through the ballroom. Serafina frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Lucien looked at her. For the first time since entering the ballroom, genuine emotion cracked faintly through the iron control in his expression. Not anger, not grief, fear. Tiny but unmistakable. Then it vanished. "It means," he said softly, "that your white dress is no longer the biggest scandal in this room." The note disappeared into Lucien Ashbourne's coat pocket as though it had never existed at all. That alone terrified the ballroom more than panic would have. Serafina understood enough already to recognize dangerous self-control when she saw it. Men who lost their tempers could be predicted. Men who became quieter were another matter entirely. The orchestra faltered uncertainly before continuing again beneath the chandeliers. Nobody resumed normal conversation. The air inside Ashbourne Hall had changed too completely for that. Whispers slid through the ballroom in nervous currents, while noblemen exchanged tense glances over crystal glasses, and women leaned behind jeweled fans pretending discretion they no longer possessed. Serafina still stood in the center of the dance floor beside the Duke, exposed beneath every candle in the room. "Your Grace," Lady Verona said carefully, "perhaps this conversation would be better continued privately." Lucien's eyes remained on Serafina. No one word. Flat. Final. Verona's jaw tightened by almost nothing. "You are causing unnecessary speculation. London society survives entirely on speculation. Not this kind. Especially this kind." The surrounding nobles pretended not to react while reacting to every syllable. Serafina suddenly understood something deeply unpleasant. These people did not merely attend scandals. They fed on them. Ballroom gossip was blood sport wrapped in silk gloves and diamond necklaces. Tonight she had unknowingly stepped into the center of the arena. Lucien extended his hand toward her again. "Miss Vale." She hesitated only briefly this time before placing her hand in his once more. A low murmur swept through the ballroom. The second acceptance mattered more than the first somehow. The Duke noticed it too. His gaze swept briefly across the watching crowd before returning to her. "You learn quickly," he said quietly. "I am trying to survive." "Good." Another waltz began. Slower this time. More intimate. The chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while servants moved carefully around the edges of the room, replenishing champagne nobody was truly drinking anymore. Serafina became painfully aware of how close Lucien stood. Not improper. Never improper. But impossible to ignore. Every movement he made carried restraint sharpened into elegance. He smelled faintly of cedar smoke and winter air, like cold forests after snow. "What was in the note?" she asked softly. "Trouble. That narrows nothing. It was not meant to." Despite everything, the answer nearly pulled a startled laugh from her. She managed to suppress it barely in time. Lucien noticed anyway. One dark eyebrow lifted faintly. "Did you just almost laugh at me, Miss Vale?" "No, Your Grace. A terrible liar. A cautious one." Another turn carried them past towering windows glazed black with winter night. Snow drifted beyond the glass in slow silver spirals beneath the estate lanterns. Inside the ballroom, the heat from hundreds of candles blurred the air slightly, softening the edges of crystal and gold and polished stone. Yet none of it reached Lucien Ashbourne. He still looked carved from winter itself. "Everyone here fears you," Serafina said quietly before she could stop herself. The words escaped too honestly. His expression did not change. Do you? She considered lying. I think, she answered carefully, that everyone else is afraid because they understand the rules of this world better than I do. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes again. And yet you are the only person in this room speaking honestly to me tonight. Perhaps because I have not learned the rules properly. Do not. The response came immediately. Firm. Almost harsh. Serafina blinked. Lucien guided her through another turn before continuing more quietly. The rules of this world exist to protect people already holding power. His gaze drifted briefly across the ballroom. Most of the people here mistake cruelty for refinement. Serafina followed his gaze. Lady Verona stood near the musicians, now surrounded by admirers. Elegant, perfectly composed. Yet even from across the ballroom Serafina could feel the woman watching them. Calculating. And her? She asked carefully. Lady Verona Blackwell understands the rules better than anyone. You sound exhausted by her. I am exhausted by many things. His tone ended the subject neatly. Nearby, several young debutantes whispered together behind fans while openly staring at Serafina's gown. One finally gathered enough courage to approach. She could not have been older than 17. Pretty in a nervous, fragile way. Pale blue silk. Trembling smile. Your Grace. Lucien inclined his head minimally. Lady Charlotte. The girl curtsied quickly before turning wide eyes toward Serafina. Miss Vale? She breathed softly. Is it true? Serafina frowned. Is what true? Charlotte looked almost dizzy with excitement. That the white dress means the Duke has chosen you. Silence spread immediately around the nearest nobles. Even conversations 10 feet away quieted. Serafina felt heat rush sharply into her face. No, she said at once. It was an accident. Charlotte looked disappointed. Oh, Lady Charlotte, Lucien said calmly. It is impolite to interrogate guests. Sorry, Your Grace. She curtsied again, mortified now, and hurried away through the crowd. Serafina exhaled slowly. This is becoming impossible. No, Lucien's hand remained steady against her waist. It is becoming visible. That is worse. His gaze settled on her again. Direct. Measuring. For a woman like you, perhaps. The words caught her unexpectedly. A woman like me? Quiet. He paused briefly. People tend to underestimate quiet women until it becomes dangerous. Serafina stared at him for half a heartbeat too long. Nobody had ever described her that way before. Quiet had always meant forgettable. Harmless. Easy to overlook. Yet Lucien said it like recognition instead of dismissal. Before she could answer, the ballroom doors opened again. A second servant entered hurriedly. This one looked even paler than the first. He approached Lucien carefully as though nearing a sleeping wolf. Your Grace. Lucien's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. What now? The servant swallowed. There is a gentleman requesting immediate audience. Then he may wait. He says he cannot. The servant lowered his voice. He mentioned Lady Eleanor. Everything changed instantly. Serafina felt it beneath Lucien's hand before she saw it on his face. Not movement. Stillness. The terrible stillness of a man locking emotion behind iron doors. Around the ballroom, several older nobles exchanged alarmed looks. Lady Verona went completely motionless near the orchestra platform. Eleanor. The name moved through the ballroom in fractured whispers. Serafina heard it repeated again and again beneath lowered voices. Why would someone mention Eleanor tonight? After all these years? Impossible. Lucien released Serafina's hand slowly. Stay here. Your Grace. He looked down at her then, and for the first time all evening the mask slipped enough for exhaustion to show clearly beneath it. Real exhaustion. Old and heavy. Do not leave the ballroom. The request sounded dangerously close to concern. Before Serafina could answer, Lady Verona crossed the room toward them with deliberate grace. Lucien. It was the first time anyone had used his given name openly tonight. I strongly suggest ending the evening now. I did not ask for your advice. No, but you need it. Her voice lowered. Mentioning Eleanor during the winter ball is not coincidence. Serafina watched carefully between them. Something lived beneath this conversation that she did not yet understand. Something old, painful, dangerous enough to make even powerful people nervous. Lucian's gaze turned briefly toward the grand staircase leading upward into the darker levels of Ashbourne Hall. The estate suddenly felt enormous around them, less like a home than a fortress holding too many secrets behind locked doors. "Keep the guests occupied," he told Verona. Her eyes narrowed faintly. "And the girl again." Serafina hated the phrase instantly. Lucian looked back at Serafina, long enough that several nearby aristocrats visibly noticed. "Miss Vale remains under my protection." The ballroom went dead silent yet again. Verona's expression finally cracked by 1 degree. Not shock, something closer to disbelief. "Lucian," she said carefully, "you cannot possibly mean to continue this." "Continue what?" "This spectacle." Interesting choice of word. His voice remained calm, especially from someone who spent the last hour feeding it. Verona's mouth tightened. "You are behaving irrationally." "No," Lucian's eyes sharpened dangerously. "I am behaving intentionally." A visible ripple moved through the watching nobles. Serafina suddenly realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The Duke never explained himself publicly. Yet tonight he continued making declarations around her that sounded increasingly impossible to misunderstand. Verona noticed the same thing. "You barely know her," she said quietly. "That has never stopped anyone in this room before. This is different." "Yes." Lucian's gaze drifted briefly toward Serafina again. "It is." The answer stunned the surrounding crowd into absolute silence. Even Serafina forgot how to breathe for a second. Lucian stepped backward then. Distance immediately returned between them like cold water rushing into empty space. "Do not leave the ballroom," he repeated quietly to her. "I mean it." Then he turned and walked toward the staircase without another word. The crowd parted instantly before him. Nobody attempted to stop him. Nobody dared. Serafina remained standing beneath the chandeliers alone in her white silk gown, while 200 aristocrats stared openly now. The moment Lucian disappeared beyond the staircase landing, the whispers exploded across the ballroom like broken glass. "Did you hear him? Intentional. My God. Who is she? What happened to Eleanor? He called her protected. That has meaning. Everyone knows it has meaning." Serafina's pulse thundered unevenly in her chest. Lady Verona remained several feet away, watching her now with an expression no longer softened by politeness. Cold calculation replaced elegance completely. Slowly, gracefully, Verona approached. "You should be careful, Miss Vale." Serafina straightened instinctively. "About what?" Verona stopped directly in front of her. "Men haunted by dead women often mistake obsession for affection." The words landed softly, cruelly. Before Serafina could answer, a frightened scream echoed suddenly from somewhere above the ballroom. Every head snapped upward at once. Then came the sound that froze the entire estate. A woman's voice crying out from the second-floor gallery. "The portrait is gone." For 3 terrible seconds, nobody in the ballroom moved. The scream echoed through the upper galleries of Ashbourne Hall like shattered glass beneath water. Then the whispers began all at once. "The portrait. Which portrait? Dear God. Not tonight." Serafina looked instinctively toward the second-floor balcony circling the ballroom. Candlelight flickered across carved railings and towering marble columns, while startled guests craned their necks upward searching for the source of the commotion. Above them, a maid stood frozen near the eastern corridor, entranced with both hands pressed against her mouth. White-faced, terrified, Lady Verona closed her eyes briefly as though some dreadful inevitability had finally arrived. "What portrait?" Serafina asked quietly. Verona looked at her with sudden sharpness. "You truly know nothing. No one tells me anything. That may be the only reason you are still standing comfortably in this room." Before Serafina could answer, rapid footsteps descended the grand staircase. Lucian Ashbourne appeared again from the upper landing, moving far faster than she had seen him move all evening. The ballroom parted instantly before him. His expression had transformed completely now. The cold, detached control remained, but beneath it lived something darker. A storm held tightly behind locked iron doors. Several nobles stepped backward without realizing they were doing it. Fear moved through the room ahead of him. Real fear. Lucien stopped near the center of the ballroom. "Everyone remains downstairs," he said calmly. Nobody argued. Nobody would have dared. "The evening will continue as planned." "Continue?" An older gentleman blurted nervously. "Your Grace, with respect. Someone has broken into the memorial gallery." Lucien's eyes shifted toward the speaker. "Then I suggest the staff locate the intruder." The man immediately lowered his gaze. "Of course." Serafina studied Lucien carefully. He did not look surprised. Angry, yes. Exhausted, certainly. But not surprised. As though tonight's disaster had been waiting for him long before she arrived wearing white silk into the ballroom. "Lucien." Lady Verona approached slowly. "You should close the east wing." "It already is." Then someone unlocked it. His jaw tightened faintly. Tiny movement. Dangerous implication. Apparently, the orchestra had stopped again without instruction. Silence pressed heavily against the ballroom now while snow drifted beyond the enormous windows overlooking the frozen estate grounds. The winter ball no longer felt glamorous. Felt haunted. Lucien's gaze swept once across the crowd before settling on Serafina again. "Miss Vale." She straightened instinctively. "Yes, Your Grace. Come with me." The words detonated quietly through the ballroom. Lady Verona stepped forward immediately. "Absolutely not." Lucien did not even look at her. "Your objection is noted. She should not be involved in this." "She already is." Serafina's pulse stumbled. "Your Grace, I do not understand why you would want me there." His gaze remained fixed on her face. "Neither do I." The honesty of the answer unsettled her more than anything else tonight. Around them, nobles whispered openly now. "He cannot possibly take her upstairs." "Into the memorial gallery? Has he lost his mind?" "No, that is the problem." Lucien offered his hand again. Always the hand first. Always calm before catastrophe. Serafina hesitated only a moment this time before placing her fingers into his. The ballroom watched the gesture with terrible fascination. "Lucien." Verona's voice sharpened. "Think carefully." He finally looked at her then. "I have spent 6 years thinking carefully." The words landed with quiet violence. Verona fell silent. Lucien turned away from the ballroom without another explanation, guiding Serafina toward the grand staircase while 200 members of London society stared openly after them. The marble steps curved upward beneath enormous oil paintings and candlelit wall sconces. Serafina became increasingly aware of how silent the estate had grown outside the ballroom itself. The music no longer reached the upper levels. Only distant murmurs followed behind them like ghosts. "Am I in danger?" she asked softly once they reached the second landing. Lucien continued walking beside her. "Possibly. That is not reassuring." "I was not attempting reassurance." Despite everything, she nearly smiled again. He noticed. "There it is." "What?" "That expression." "I have no idea what you mean." You stop looking frightened for approximately 5 seconds at a time. "Perhaps because your answers are so absurd my fear becomes confused." A faint breath escaped him then. Not laughter exactly, but close enough that Serafina glanced sideways at him in surprise. Lucien caught the look immediately. "Do not become accustomed to it." "To what?" "Me almost smiling." The corridor above the ballroom stretched long and dim beneath rows of oil portraits and dark velvet wallpaper. Winter wind rattled faintly against tall windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. Several servants clustered nervously near the eastern wing entrance where a heavy iron gate stood partially open. One maid still looked close to fainting. The moment Lucien appeared, every servant straightened instantly. "Your Grace." "Who opened the gate?" Lucien asked. The butler swallowed hard. "No one knows, sir. The lock was intact less than 20 minutes ago." Lucien's expression darkened. "And the portrait?" The maid near the wall finally found her voice. "Gone, Your Grace." She pointed weakly down the corridor. "The frame is empty." Serafina felt a strange chill move through her chest. Lucien released her hand slowly before walking toward the eastern gallery entrance. The servants moved aside immediately. Nobody crossed the threshold after him. Serafina realized with growing unease that they were afraid of the room itself. Lucien glanced back once. Stay close. The eastern gallery was colder than the rest of the estate. Much colder. Candle flames flickered weakly against dark paneled walls lined with portraits, hidden beneath draped black silk. Mourning cloth. The realization settled heavily over Serafina as she followed Lucien deeper into the corridor. At the far end stood an enormous gilded frame hanging empty beneath the candlelight. A rectangle of untouched dust marked where a portrait had once remained for years. Lucien stopped walking. The entire room seemed to still around him. Serafina looked slowly toward the empty frame. Who was she? She asked quietly. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded distant somehow. Older. Lady Eleanor Whitmore. The name moved through the cold gallery like a prayer spoken too late. Serafina stepped slightly closer to the empty frame. Your fiancé. Yes. She glanced toward the black silk draped across neighboring portraits. Why are they covered? Because this wing has remained closed since her death. Serafina looked back at him sharply. For 6 years. Yes. The answer carried no embarrassment. No apology. Only exhaustion. She turned slowly again toward the empty frame. Someone had removed the portrait recently. She could see disturbed dust along the floorboards beneath it. One candle nearby still flickered unevenly as though brushed by movement moments earlier. Who would steal her portrait? Lucien's eyes hardened. Someone trying to send a message. What kind of message? He looked directly at her then. One involving you. Cold spread instantly through her stomach. That is impossible. Perhaps. I never met Lady Eleanor. No, his gaze lingered strangely on her face again. But tonight is the first winter ball since her death where another woman entered this house wearing white. Silence settled heavily between them. Serafina suddenly became acutely aware of the empty frame towering above them like an open grave. That cannot be coincidence, she whispered. No, Lucien's voice dropped lower. It cannot. A floorboard creaked somewhere deeper in the gallery. Both of them turned instantly toward the sound. The corridor beyond the mourning drapes remained dark and empty beneath trembling candlelight. Lucien stepped slightly in front of Serafina without seeming to realize he had done it. Protective. Automatic. Who is there? His voice cut sharply through the silence. No answer came. Only the distant rattle of winter wind against old windows. Serafina's pulse quickened. Perhaps it was the house settling. No, Lucien's eyes remained fixed on the darkness ahead. Someone is still here. Then, from somewhere beyond the covered portraits, a woman's voice whispered softly through the shadows. She looks exactly like her. The voice vanished so quickly Serafina almost believed she imagined it. Almost. The candle flames along the eastern gallery trembled weakly against dark velvet walls while silence closed around them again. Lucien did not move. Every line of his body had gone still with dangerous precision. Who is there? He asked again. Calm. Cold. The kind of calm that arrived immediately before storms. No answer came from the darkness beyond the mourning drapes. Only the faint groan of old floorboards somewhere deeper inside the sealed wing. Serafina realized suddenly how isolated they were from the ballroom below. The winter ball continued somewhere beneath them like another world entirely. Music drifted upward in faint fractured notes through layers of marble and stone. But here the estate felt abandoned. Frozen in grief 6 years too old to still breathe this heavily through the walls. Lucien stepped forward slowly. Stay behind me. I am beginning to dislike how often you say that. Then stop walking into dangerous situations. I did not exactly plan this evening. Something faint moved through his expression at that. Exhausted amusement, perhaps. Then it disappeared again as he pushed aside one of the black mourning drapes hanging along the corridor wall. Dust rose softly into the candlelight. Behind the drape hung another portrait. This one still intact. A severe-looking Ashbourne ancestor stared down from the canvas with pale, judgmental eyes. Empty corridor beyond. No intruder. Lucien moved farther into the gallery. Serafina followed despite every instinct warning her not to. The floor beneath her slippers creaked softly with age. Candle smoke and old varnish thickened the cold air. Someone was here, she whispered. Yes. And they knew about me. Apparently. You sound remarkably calm about that. Lucien stopped near another covered portrait. Miss Vale. Yes. I have spent 6 years waiting for someone to reopen this wound. The honesty of the statement settled heavily between them. Serafina watched him carefully now beneath the weak candlelight. The Duke no longer resembled the untouchable aristocrat who controlled ballrooms with silence alone. Here inside the morning gallery he looked tired, haunted, like a man carrying something sharp beneath his ribs for too many years. You expected this? She asked quietly. Not tonight. His hand tightened briefly around the edge of the mourning drape. But eventually, yes. Because of Lady Eleanor? Because powerful families do not bury scandals. He looked toward the empty frame at the far end of the gallery. They preserve them quietly until someone decides to weaponize them again. Serafina frowned slightly. You speak as though her death was political. Everything involving aristocracy becomes political eventually. Another floorboard creaked somewhere behind them. Both turned instantly. This time the movement was unmistakable. A shadow disappeared beyond the corner near the sealed staircase at the far side of the corridor. Lucien moved immediately, fast. The cold restraint vanished beneath pure instinct as he crossed the gallery toward the movement. Serafina hurried after him despite herself. Your Grace. Stay back. You keep saying that. He ignored her entirely. The corridor narrowed toward an old servant's staircase half hidden behind carved paneling. One iron door stood slightly open. Winter wind slipped faintly through the crack carrying the smell of snow and frozen pine from outside. Lucien pushed the door fully open. Empty staircase. No intruder. But something white lay abandoned on the top step beneath flickering candlelight. Serafina bent slowly and picked it up before Lucien could stop her. Silk ribbon. Pale ivory. Soft with age. Her stomach tightened instantly. What is this? Lucien looked at the ribbon in her hand and all color disappeared from his face. Give it to me. She did, carefully. His fingers closed around the ribbon with terrifying stillness. It belonged to Eleanor, he said quietly. Serafina felt cold move slowly down her spine. Someone took it from the portrait? No, his gaze remained fixed on the silk. This ribbon was buried with her. Silence crashed through the gallery. Even the candle flames seemed to hesitate. Serafina stared at him in disbelief. That is impossible. Yes. His voice had gone dangerously soft now. It is. A servant suddenly appeared breathless at the far end of the corridor. Your Grace. Lucien did not look up. What? Lady Verona requests your immediate presence downstairs. She may wait. Sir. The servant swallowed hard. The guests are beginning to leave. That finally drew Lucien's attention. His eyes lifted sharply toward the ballroom direction. Why? Rumors are spreading. The servant glanced nervously toward Serafina before lowering his voice. Some believe Lady Eleanor's ghost has returned. Serafina nearly laughed from sheer disbelief before realizing nobody else found the idea ridiculous. The servants looked genuinely frightened. Lucien closed his hand slowly around the ribbon. Control the staff, he said coldly. No one discusses this outside the estate. Yes, Your Grace. The servant hurried away immediately. Serafina exhaled slowly once they were alone again. Ghost stories. People prefer ghosts to truth. And what is the truth? Lucien looked at her for a long moment before answering. I do not know anymore. The confession startled her more than the ribbon had. Powerful men were not supposed to sound uncertain. Yet exhaustion carved deep shadows beneath his eyes now. He suddenly looked older than he had downstairs beneath the chandeliers. Not physically, emotionally. You loved her, Serafina said softly. The words came carefully, gently. Lucien looked away first. Yes, no hesitation, no performance. Just truth stripped bare enough to hurt. Serafina studied the empty frame again. And she died before the wedding. 3 days before. What happened? His jaw tightened. Officially. That sounds ominous. Officially, Lady Eleanor Whitmore fell from the western balcony during the winter ball. Serafina's breath caught. Officially. Lucien's gaze darkened. I found her myself. Silence settled between them again. Heavy now. Personal. Serafina suddenly understood why the estate felt haunted. Some grief stained buildings permanently. I am sorry, she whispered. Lucien looked at her sharply then, as though the softness of the words surprised him more than accusation would have. Most people are not. Most people did not lose her. Another dangerous silence. Then quietly, almost unwillingly, he said, You should stop doing that. Doing what? Speaking to me like I am human. The answer pierced straight through her chest unexpectedly. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed rapidly from the main corridor. Lady Verona appeared moments later, dark red velvet sweeping sharply behind her like spilled wine across marble. She stopped the instant she saw the ribbon in Lucien's hand. For the first time all evening, genuine fear crossed her face. No, Lucien said nothing. Verona stepped closer slowly. Where did you find that? Near the servants' staircase. Her expression hardened immediately. Then someone wants panic. Someone already has it. Verona glanced toward Serafina with visible unease now. She should not be here. She is already here. That is precisely the problem. Serafina straightened instinctively beneath the woman's gaze. You keep speaking as though I am contagious. Verona looked directly at her. No, Miss Vale. I speak as though you are dangerous. I am a pastor's daughter from Norwich. And yet tonight you arrived wearing Eleanor's color. The words landed sharply in the cold gallery. Serafina looked toward Lucien. Was Lady Eleanor also meant to wear white at the winter ball? Verona answered before he could. No woman had ever worn white here before Eleanor. Another chill moved through Serafina slowly. Then why create the tradition afterward? Lucien's eyes remained fixed on the ribbon. Because after she died, I never intended another woman to stand beside me again. The honesty of the statement left the gallery completely silent. Serafina suddenly understood the true meaning of tonight's scandal. It was never about etiquette alone. White did not symbolize engagement here anymore. It symbolized memory, mourning, the ghost of a woman the Duke had never truly buried. And now she appears, Verona said quietly, looking directly at Serafina. In white. Serafina opened her mouth to protest, but another realization stopped her cold. Earlier in the ballroom someone had whispered she looked exactly like her. Slowly, cautiously, Serafina turned back toward the empty portrait frame. What did Lady Eleanor look like? Neither Lucien nor Verona answered immediately. That silence frightened her more than words would have. Finally Verona spoke softly. You should not ask questions you are not prepared to hear answered. Then Lucien looked directly at Serafina beneath the flickering candlelight and said the words that made her blood turn cold. She had your eyes. For a moment, Serafina forgot the cold. Forgot the empty portrait frame towering behind them. Forgot the whispers spreading through Ashbourne Hall like poison beneath polished floors. She only stared at Lucien while his words echoed heavily through the morning gallery. She had your eyes. The statement should not have mattered. Gray eyes were hardly rare. Yet something in the way he said it made her chest tighten painfully beneath her ribs. Not fascination. Not attraction. Recognition. Old grief colliding violently with something living. Lady Verona broke the silence first. That was unnecessary. Lucien's gaze remained on Serafina. It was true. Truth is not always useful. I am tired of useful lies. Verona's expression sharpened. And I am tired of watching you punish yourself. Serafina looked carefully between them. There was history here beyond simple friendship. Years of shared damage hidden beneath controlled voices and aristocratic restraint. You both speak as though Lady Eleanor's death was not accidental, Serafina said quietly. The gallery fell still again. Verona looked away first. Lucien did not. People fall, he said evenly. People are also pushed. A chill moved visibly through the room. Even the servants lingering near the entrance lowered their eyes immediately. Serafina swallowed carefully. Do you believe someone killed her? Belief is irrelevant. Lucien folded the silk ribbon slowly into his palm. I failed to prove anything. Lucien, Verona warned softly. She deserves honesty. Does she? Verona's gaze snapped toward Serafina. No offense, Miss Vale, but you arrived in this house 4 hours ago wearing the dead woman's color. Now her portrait is missing and half the estate believes ghosts are walking the halls. I hardly planned any of this. No, Verona studied her carefully. That is what makes it dangerous. Lucien suddenly stepped away from the empty frame. Decision settled across his features like iron locking into place. The ball continues. Verona stared at him in disbelief. You cannot possibly be serious. The guests leave now. Rumors spread faster. They are already spreading. Then we control them. Serafina frowned slightly. How exactly does one control rumors involving dead fiancés and missing portraits? Lucien's mouth almost shifted again, that faint near smile appearing only long enough to vanish. With difficulty, he turned toward the gallery exit. Miss Vale. She looked up immediately. Yes. You will remain at Ashbourne Hall tonight. Serafina blinked. I beg your pardon? Verona closed her eyes briefly as though enduring a headache. Lucien. No, Serafina straightened instinctively. Absolutely not. Lucien stopped walking. Slowly he turned back toward her beneath the candlelight. No, I am already the center of enough scandal for one evening. Leaving now would worsen it. Remaining here overnight with you would destroy me socially. Society already believes you accepted my proposal. The bluntness of the statement sent heat instantly into her face. That is not funny. I was not joking. Your Grace. She lowered her voice carefully. I am a respectable woman. Which is precisely why you cannot leave this estate tonight. Frustration flashed through her chest. You do realize those two statements directly oppose each other. No, his gaze remained calm. They intersect perfectly. Verona stepped forward sharply. Lucien, think. I am. No. You are reacting. The difference has become irrelevant. Serafina watched him carefully now. Something had changed in the Duke since entering the morning gallery. The cold restraint remained, but beneath it lived urgency now. Not panic exactly. Protective instinct sharpened by old fear. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you suddenly care whether I stay? Lucien looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because someone deliberately connected you to Eleanor tonight. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. And, Serafina whispered. And 6 years ago, Lucien said softly, the last woman publicly associated with me died before sunrise. Cold spread slowly through her stomach. Verona looked genuinely angry now. You should not have said that. She deserves the truth. No. She deserves distance from this family before it destroys her too. The words landed harder than intended. Everyone in the gallery felt it. Lucien's jaw tightened visibly. Enough, Verona. Is it? Her composure cracked slightly for the first time all evening. Because I watched what happened to Eleanor. I watched what it did to you afterward. And now suddenly another girl appears in white silk, looking enough like her to make servants pray in hallways. Serafina stepped backwards slightly before she realized she was doing it. Lucien noticed immediately. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Regret, perhaps. Miss Vale. Do not. Her voice came softer than intended. Please do not look at me like that. He went still. Like what? Like you are seeing someone else. The words hung painfully between them. Lucien looked away first. That alone told her everything. Verona exhaled quietly. Finally, the Duke's voice lowered dangerously. Do not mistake guilt for weakness. I mistake nothing anymore. Snow rattled suddenly against the tall gallery windows. Somewhere downstairs the orchestra resumed again. The distant music eerie now beneath the weight of the estate's secrets. Servants still hovered nervously near the entrance, pretending not to listen while hearing every word. Serafina suddenly felt exhausted down to the marrow of her bones. For hours ago she had been worried about embarrassing herself among aristocrats. Now she stood inside a sealed morning wing, listening to a duke confess suspicions surrounding his dead fiancée, while ghosts of old scandals moved through candlelit corridors. I should leave, she said quietly. Lucien's attention snapped back to her instantly. No, you keep saying that. Because I mean it. And I mean this. She drew a careful breath. Whatever happened here 6 years ago has nothing to do with me. Lucien stared at her for one unbearable moment before answering. I hope that is true. The honesty of the response chilled her more than fear would have. Verona moved toward Serafina then, her expression softer now. Not kind exactly, but less sharp. Miss Vale. Yes. How much do you know about your mother's family? The question caught Serafina completely off guard. Very little. Why? Verona exchanged a glance with Lucien. Something unspoken passed silently between them. Because Eleanor Whitmore also came from a pastoral family outside Norwich. Serafina's pulse stumbled. What? Different town. Verona continued carefully. Different name, but similar circumstances. That means nothing. Perhaps. Verona studied her face again beneath the flickering candlelight. Perhaps not. Lucien suddenly turned toward the gallery entrance. Enough for tonight. His voice regained that cold ducal authority again. Final. Untouchable. The guests remain downstairs. The east wing is sealed immediately. No one enters without my permission. The servants straightened instantly. Yes, Your Grace. He looked back toward Serafina. You will be escorted to a guest suite. I did not agree to stay. You are staying. Frustration sparked sharply through her exhaustion. Do dukes ever hear the word no? Rarely. That explains much. Another tiny flicker threatened the corner of his mouth. Gone almost immediately, but this time Serafina definitely saw it. So did Verona. Her expression darkened further. This is exactly what worries me. Lucien ignored her completely. Mrs. Pembroke will prepare rooms in the north wing. The north wing? Verona frowned. You never place guests there. Miss Vale is not most guests. Silence followed that statement immediately. Serafina felt it strike the room like thrown glass. Even the servants noticed. Verona's eyes narrowed slowly. Careful, Lucien. I am being careful. No, Verona looked directly at him. You are already attached. The accusation settled heavily through the morning gallery. Lucien's face became unreadable once more. Stone replacing every trace of emotion. You mistake responsibility for attachment. Verona laughed softly without humor. Do I? Nobody answered. A clock somewhere deeper inside the estate struck midnight. The sound echoed faintly through Ashbourne Hall like a warning bell. Serafina suddenly realized she had not eaten since morning. Had not sat down in hours. Had not breathed properly since entering the ballroom in white silk. Midnight. And somehow the night felt less finished now than when it began. Lucien stepped toward the gallery exit. Come. Serafina hesitated before following him. As they passed the empty portrait frame once more, something caught her eye near the bottom corner of the wall. Tiny scratches carved faintly into the wood paneling beneath the missing portrait. Not old. Fresh. She slowed instinctively. Wait. Lucien stopped immediately. What is it? Serafina crouched carefully beside the wall. Her fingers brushed lightly across the carved marks. Letters. Someone had scratched words directly into the wood beneath the empty frame. Lucien moved beside her instantly. His expression darkened as he read the message carved into the paneling. Not her. Silence swallowed the gallery whole. Then beneath the weak candlelight, Serafina looked slowly up at Lucien Ashbourne and realized he had gone completely pale. Lucien stared at the carved words as though they had reached through 6 years of silence and wrapped cold fingers around his throat. Not her. The letters cut unevenly into the wood beneath the empty portrait frame. Fresh marks. Fresh splinters. Someone had carved them recently. Very recently. Serafina rose slowly from her crouched position while unease tightened painfully through her chest. What does it mean? She whispered. Lucien did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the message beneath the candlelight. Verona stepped closer beside them, the dark velvet of her gown whispering softly against the floorboards. The moment she saw the words, all color disappeared from her face. No, she breathed quietly. Absolutely not. Serafina looked sharply between them. You both know something. Neither answered. The silence became answer enough. Lucien finally exhaled slowly through his nose. Controlled. Deliberate. Dangerous. Seal this corridor. He ordered the servants behind them without turning around. No one enters the East Wing tonight. Yes, Your Grace. And if anyone speaks about what they saw here, his voice lowered softly, they leave this estate permanently. Fear flickered instantly across the servants' faces. Of course, sir. The staff scattered immediately down the corridor. Only Lucien, Verona, and Serafina remained beside the empty portrait frame now. Candlelight flickered weakly across black mourning drapes while winter wind rattled somewhere inside the walls of Ashbourne Hall. Serafina suddenly realized her hands had gone cold. You are frightening me, she admitted quietly. Lucien finally looked at her. Something painful moved through his expression before disappearing again beneath rigid control. Good. The answer stunned her. Good. Fear keeps people alive. Lucien, Verona warned sharply. Enough. No, he folded the silk ribbon tightly into his palm. Not anymore. He turned back toward the carved message. 6 years. His voice sounded distant now, almost to himself. 6 years and suddenly someone chooses tonight. Serafina swallowed carefully. Because of me. Lucien did not deny it. That hurt more than denial would have. Verona crossed her arms tightly beneath the candlelight. The timing is too precise. Yes. Someone knew she would arrive wearing white. Impossible, Serafina said immediately. No one knew what dress I planned to wear. Lucien's eyes shifted toward her again. Did anyone see the gown before tonight? She hesitated. My aunt. Anyone else? Lady Beatrice, perhaps. One of her maids helped unpack after we arrived. Verona frowned faintly. That is enough. Serafina stared at her. You truly believe this was arranged? I believe someone reopened Eleanor's grave the exact night another woman appeared wearing her color. Verona's voice sharpened. I no longer believe in coincidence. The gallery seemed colder suddenly. Serafina looked again toward the empty frame towering above them. Why carve those words? Lucien answered quietly. Because someone thinks I am making a mistake. By associating me with Eleanor. Yes. Then why not simply say so? Lucien's expression darkened. Because aristocrats rarely speak plainly when cruelty can be theatrical instead. Silence settled heavily again. Somewhere below them the orchestra shifted into another dance while the winter ball continued beneath layers of fear and whispered scandal. The contrast felt surreal now. Beautiful music drifting upward into a corridor full of ghosts. Serafina looked carefully at Lucien. Did Lady Eleanor look very much like me? He went still again. Verona answered before he could. Enough to disturb people. That is not an answer. It is the only safe one. Serafina drew a slow breath. I deserve honesty. Lucien laughed once softly, bitterly. That sentence alone proves you have never lived among aristocrats. She should not have smiled at that. But she did. Tiny. Exhausted. Human. Lucien noticed instantly. So did Verona. There it is again. The Duke murmured quietly. What? Serafina asked. You smile at the wrong moments. Perhaps because your house has become increasingly absurd. You are standing inside a sealed mourning gallery beside a stolen portrait and a carved threat. Exactly. Her gray eyes lifted toward him steadily. Absurd. For one brief dangerous second, Lucien Ashbourne almost truly smiled. Not the faint flicker from earlier. Something realer, warmer. It transformed his face completely before vanishing beneath iron control once more. Verona saw it happen. Her expression hardened instantly. This needs to stop. Lucien's attention shifted toward her. What does? Whatever this is becoming. I am protecting a guest. No, Verona stepped closer. You are looking at her the way you used to look at Eleanor. The words sliced cleanly through the gallery. Serafina felt the tension hit the room instantly. Lucien's face became unreadable. Careful. Someone should have been careful 6 years ago. Silence crashed down. Serafina looked sharply between them. What happened 6 years ago? Neither answered immediately. Verona looked away first this time. Lucien finally spoke. I failed someone. That is not the same as explaining. It is enough. Not for me. The answer surprised all three of them. Serafina straightened slowly beneath their attention. Everyone keeps speaking around me instead of to me. Her voice remained soft, calm. I walked into this estate wearing the wrong color and somehow became attached to a dead woman whose portrait vanished tonight. If I am truly in danger, I deserve more than half-truths. Lucien watched her silently for several long seconds. Then, quietly, "You remind me of her there too." Serafina's pulse stumbled painfully. How? Eleanor never accepted partial answers. Verona closed her eyes briefly. Lucien. But he continued anyway. The first time I met her, she argued with me for 20 minutes beside a frozen fountain because she believed I was arrogant. Serafina blinked despite herself. Were you? A dangerous pause. Then Lucien answered calmly. Yes. Against all reason, she laughed softly. The sound startled the gallery itself. Small, brief, honest. Lucien looked at her as though he had forgotten what laughter sounded like in this wing of the estate. Verona looked almost alarmed. This is exactly what I feared. What? Serafina asked. Verona's gaze settled carefully on her face. That he would start breathing again. The words silenced everyone. Lucien's expression hardened immediately. Enough. No, Verona looked suddenly exhausted beneath the candlelight. I buried Eleanor too, Lucien. Do not act as though you alone suffered. Something sharp flickered across his face then. Grief stripped briefly of elegance. I know. The quietness of the answer hurt more than anger would have. Serafina looked away instinctively toward the empty portrait frame. What was she like? She asked softly. Lucien's eyes followed hers toward the missing portrait. For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer again. Instead he said quietly, alive. The word settled strangely in the cold gallery. People feared her because she noticed everything. His voice lowered slightly. She laughed during serious conversations. She hated silence. She once climbed onto the roof of Ashbourne Hall during a thunderstorm because she wanted to see lightning over the valley. Serafina smiled faintly despite the sadness threading through his words. That sounds reckless. It was. Something almost tender moved through his expression before fading again. I spent most of our engagement trying unsuccessfully to keep her safe. Verona looked down at the floorboards. And in the end, Lucien's jaw tightened sharply. Silence swallowed the unfinished sentence whole. Serafina understood anyway. The realization settled painfully through her chest. He had not merely lost Eleanor. He had built an entire mausoleum around the guilt afterward. The East Wing, the mourning drapes, the untouched portrait gallery. 6 years frozen inside one terrible night. Suddenly she understood something else too. Lucien Ashbourne had not truly been living all this time. He had only been enduring. A loud crash echoed faintly from somewhere downstairs. All three looked toward the ballroom immediately. Raised voices followed beneath the distant music. One servant came running breathlessly up the corridor moments later. Your Grace. Lucien straightened instantly. What now? There has been an incident in the ballroom. What kind of incident? The servant swallowed hard. Lady Blackthorne publicly accused Miss Vale of manipulating you. Verona muttered something under her breath. Lucien's expression turned dangerously still. Who else heard it? Everyone, sir. Of course they had. Aristocratic cruelty never wasted an audience. Serafina exhaled slowly. Wonderful. It became worse. The servant continued nervously. Lady Blackthorne also claimed Miss Vale deliberately impersonated Lady Eleanor to gain your attention. Silence. Cold and immediate. Lucien's eyes darkened into something almost frightening. Who allowed her to say that publicly? The servant looked confused by the question. No one stops Lady Blackthorne, sir. Lucien's voice dropped lower. I do. Even Verona looked slightly alarmed now. Lucien. He ignored her completely. Bring Lady Blackthorne to the West Salon. Immediately, Your Grace? Now. The servant hurried away, almost tripping over himself. Serafina looked carefully at Lucien. You do not need to defend me. His gaze shifted toward her. Calm. Absolute. Yes, he said softly. I do. Before she could answer, another realization struck her sharply. Wait. Lucien frowned slightly. What? Serafina looked toward the empty portrait frame again, then toward the carved message beneath it. If someone wanted society to believe I am replacing Eleanor, her pulse quickened. Then why write not her? Lucian went still instantly. Verona's expression changed too. Oh God! Serafina looked slowly between them as the horrifying possibility settled into place. What if the message was not warning you about me? Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Lucian's face drained of all remaining warmth. Then what was it warning me about? Serafina stared toward the empty frame beneath the flickering candles and whispered the thought neither of them wanted spoken aloud. What if Eleanor was never the woman they intended to kill? The words settled into the morning gallery like smoke that refused to clear. What if Eleanor was never the woman they intended to kill? Lucian did not move. For one terrible heartbeat, Serafina thought he might simply stop breathing altogether. The candlelight along the corridor flickered weakly across his face, catching the sharp line of his jaw and the sudden emptiness in his eyes. Verona looked horrified, truly horrified. No, she whispered immediately. No, that is impossible. Is it? Serafina asked quietly. Nobody answered. The silence itself became unbearable. Lucian finally turned slowly toward the empty portrait frame again. His voice, when it came, sounded stripped raw beneath the iron calm. Eleanor was not supposed to attend the winter ball that night. Serafina frowned slightly. What? Verona looked sharply toward him. You never told anyone that. No one asked the correct questions. His gaze remained fixed on the frame. Eleanor became ill 2 days before the ball. Fever. Exhaustion. She intended to remain upstairs. Serafina's pulse quickened. Then why did she come down? Because someone sent a note requesting she meet them privately in the West Gallery. A chill spread instantly through the corridor. Who sent it? Lucian laughed once softly, bitterly. That was precisely the problem. The note carried no signature. Verona crossed her arms tightly. Everyone assumed she slipped. Everyone preferred to assume she slipped. Lucian's voice darkened. The alternative would have implicated half the aristocracy present that evening. Serafina looked carefully at him now. And you? I never believed she fell accidentally. The honesty of the confession settled heavily through the gallery. Serafina stepped closer to the empty portrait frame almost without realizing it. Then perhaps tonight is not about Eleanor returning. Lucian's eyes shifted toward her immediately. Explain. She drew a careful breath. If someone wanted to reopen the scandal publicly, they could have simply exposed old rumors. Her gaze moved toward the carved message beneath the frame. But instead they removed the portrait and left those words. Not her. Verona's expression slowly changed as understanding began to spread across her face. Oh God! Serafina continued quietly. That sounds less like a threat. She looked directly at Lucian. And more like a correction. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Lucian's hand tightened visibly around the folded silk ribbon. You think someone believes Eleanor died by mistake. I think someone wants you to reconsider the entire night. Verona shook her head sharply. No, absolutely not. If that were true. She stopped suddenly. Serafina noticed immediately. What? Verona looked away. Lucian's gaze sharpened. Finish the sentence. If that were true, Verona said quietly at last. Then the question becomes obvious. Serafina felt cold settle deeper beneath her ribs because she already knew the question before Verona spoke it aloud. Who was the real target? The corridor seemed to contract around them. Lucian looked toward Serafina then, slowly, carefully, like a man noticing danger too late. No, Verona said immediately. Do not start imagining absurd connections. Absurd. Lucian's voice lowered dangerously. A woman appears in my ballroom wearing Eleanor's color for the first time in 6 years. The portrait disappears. Someone carves not her beneath the frame. He looked back at Serafina again. And she has Eleanor's eyes. Verona exhaled sharply through her nose. Gray eyes are not evidence. No, Lucian's expression hardened. But timing often is. Serafina suddenly felt deeply aware of the white silk still wrapped around her body. Earlier the dress had represented embarrassment. Scandal. Now it felt like bait. You truly believe this could involve me somehow? She whispered. Lucian did not answer quickly enough. That silence frightened her more than words would have. Verona stepped closer immediately. Miss Vale, listen to me carefully. Her tone softened for the first time all evening. You need to understand something about powerful families. I am beginning to dislike every sentence that starts that way. Surprisingly, Verona almost smiled. Sadness touched the expression briefly before vanishing. Fair. She folded her gloved hands together carefully. Aristocratic scandals rarely disappear. They evolve. People marry strategically, inherit strategically, destroy strategically. Her eyes shifted briefly toward Lucien. And sometimes people die strategically too. Serafina swallowed. You think Eleanor's death involved inheritance? I think Eleanor was about to become Duchess of Ashbourne. Verona's voice lowered. That made her politically valuable. Lucien stared toward the dark corridor windows where snow pressed softly against the glass. Eleanor once told me someone had been following her during the season. Serafina looked sharply toward him. What? She dismissed it afterward. His jaw tightened faintly. Said I worried too much. Did you investigate? Yes. Bitterness sharpened the single word. No one found anything. Verona frowned slowly. You never told me that either. I stopped speaking about Eleanor years ago. Silence settled again. Serafina suddenly understood something important. Lucien Ashbourne had not buried his grief because he healed. He buried it because nobody helped him carry it. You blame yourself, she said softly. His gaze shifted instantly toward hers. I was responsible for protecting her. You were not responsible for another person's choices. That is not how titled families function. The answer came too quickly, too sharply. Serafina studied him beneath the flickering candles. No, she said quietly. That is how guilty men function. The gallery went silent. Verona actually looked startled. Lucien's face became unreadable again. Stone, winter, distance. Yet something fragile moved beneath it now. Something exhausted by years of self-punishment. You speak very confidently for someone who met me tonight. Perhaps because pain sounds familiar in every accent. The words escaped before she could stop them. Lucien stared at her for one long, unbearable second. Then softly, almost to himself, God help me. Verona closed her eyes briefly. There it is again. Serafina frowned slightly. What? Verona looked directly at Lucien. The way he talks when he starts caring. Lucien's expression hardened immediately. Enough. No, Verona folded her arms tighter. You spent 6 years frozen solid. Then this woman walks into your ballroom and suddenly you are speaking like a man instead of a monument. Serafina felt heat creep into her face instantly. Lady Verona, do not misunderstand me. Verona's gaze softened slightly toward her. I am not insulting you. I am terrified for both of you. Lucien turned away abruptly toward the gallery exit. This conversation ends now. Lucien. No, his voice cracked sharply through the corridor. Final. Dangerous. The east wing remains sealed. The guests leave at dawn. And Miss Vale stays under guard until I determine who orchestrated tonight. Serafina blinked. Under guard. Protection. That sounds suspiciously similar to imprisonment. Get accustomed to disappointment. She should not have laughed. She did anyway. A small, exhausted sound escaping before she could stop it. Lucien paused halfway toward the corridor door. Slowly he looked back at her. That dangerous, almost smile returned briefly. Softer this time. Human. It transformed him in ways she suspected he did not understand. Verona noticed too. Her expression turned almost mournful. You smiled at him again, she murmured quietly. Serafina looked startled. What? You keep doing it. Verona's eyes shifted toward Lucien. And he keeps answering. The Duke immediately looked away. That alone confirmed everything. Before anyone could speak again, rapid footsteps echoed from the main staircase beyond the gallery. A younger servant appeared breathless near the entrance. Your Grace. Lucien straightened instantly. What now? A guest has collapsed downstairs. Verona cursed softly beneath her breath. Who? Lady Blackthorne. The servant swallowed hard. She claims she saw someone standing on the west balcony outside the ballroom windows. Lucian's expression sharpened dangerously. Who? She says. The servant hesitated visibly. She says it was Lady Eleanor. Silence. Then Serafina noticed something that chilled her more than ghost stories ever could. Lucian did not look frightened by the claim. He looked furious. No, he said softly. Verona frowned. Lucian. His gaze darkened toward the ballroom below. Someone is staging this. Why? Serafina asked quietly. Lucian looked directly at her. Because they want the house afraid before they reveal the real target. The implication landed heavily between them. Serafina's pulse quickened. You still think that target could be me? I think, Lucian said carefully, that someone spent tonight trying to connect you to a woman who died under suspicious circumstances. He stepped closer then, near enough that she could see exhaustion beneath his eyes again. And I think whoever carved that message knows something about Eleanor's death the rest of us never did. Silence stretched softly between them. Snow whispered against the windows. The distant ballroom music had stopped again below. What happens now? Serafina asked. Lucian's gaze held hers steadily. Now, he said quietly, I find out why a stranger from Norwich walked into my house wearing the face of my dead fiancé. The corridor fell silent after Lucian's words. A stranger from Norwich walked into my house wearing the face of my dead fiancé. Serafina stood motionless beneath the trembling candlelight while the weight of the sentence settled heavily into her chest. She should have felt insulted. Or frightened. Instead she felt something stranger. Seen too closely by a man who understood grief better than anyone she had ever met. Verona recovered first. Lucian. Her voice sharpened quietly. You are exhausted. I am observant. You are projecting. Am I? His gray eyes remained fixed on Serafina. Then explain tonight. Nobody could. That was the problem. Too many impossible details now circled Ashbourne Hall like wolves in snow. The white dress. The missing portrait. The carved message. The silk ribbon. The whispers of Eleanor's ghost walking the galleries. Serafina suddenly wished desperately for the small cottage outside Norwich. For weak tea beside the fire and Aunt Lydia complaining about winter vegetables. Anything ordinary. Anything untouched by aristocratic tragedy. Your Grace. She drew a careful breath. You are speaking as though I arrived here intentionally. Lucian's expression softened by one dangerous degree. I know you did not. Then why do you keep looking at me like I hold answers? Because someone in this house believes you do. The words landed coldly. Verona stepped between them slightly. Enough for tonight. No, Lucian's voice remained calm. Tonight is precisely when the truth began moving again. He turned toward the servant waiting anxiously near the gallery entrance. Bring Lady Blackthorne to the West Salon immediately. Yes, Your Grace. And no one leaves the estate grounds until morning. The servant hesitated. Even the guests, sir? Lucian's gaze sharpened. Especially the guests. The servant hurried away without another word. Serafina looked toward the ballroom staircase below. That will create panic. Good. Good. Fear makes liars careless. Verona rubbed slowly at her temple. You are becoming impossible again. I was always impossible. No, her voice lowered softly. You were grieving. The silence afterward hurt. Serafina saw it in Lucian's face before he buried the reaction again beneath iron control. He looked away first. Mrs. Pembroke will escort Miss Vale to the north wing. Lucian. Verona's tone sharpened immediately. Do not place her there. Why? Serafina asked quietly. Verona hesitated. Lucian answered instead. Because the north wing overlooks the west balcony. Cold moved slowly through Serafina's stomach. The balcony where Eleanor died. Yes. That seems unnecessarily cruel. No, Lucian looked directly at her again. It seems necessary. For what? For honesty. The answer unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Before she could respond, another servant appeared breathlessly from the main staircase. Your Grace. Lucian visibly lost patience. What now? A gentleman downstairs insists on seeing Miss Vale privately. Serafina frowned immediately. Me? Yes, miss. The servant swallowed nervously. He claims it concerns your mother. Everything stopped. Serafina felt it instantly. The air. The candlelight. Lucian's attention. Verona straightened sharply beside her. "Who?" Lucian asked softly. The servant lowered his voice. "Lord Atticus Wren." Silence crashed through the gallery. Verona actually swore beneath her breath. Serafina blinked in confusion. "Who is that?" Lucian's face became dangerously unreadable. "A man who should not know your name. That is not reassuring." "No," his gaze hardened toward the servant. "Where is he now?" "In the West Salon, sir." Lucian moved immediately toward the corridor exit. "Miss Vale comes with me." Verona caught his arm sharply. "Absolutely not." He stopped. "Release my sleeve, Verona." Atticus Wren spent years attached to the Whitmore estate. Her voice lowered urgently. "If he requested the girl by name, then this situation is worse than we thought." Serafina's pulse quickened. "Someone should explain what is happening." Lucian looked at her carefully. "Lord Atticus Wren is a political strategist." "That sounds harmless." "It is not." Verona folded her arms tightly. "Families hire men like Wren when they need scandals buried quietly." Cold spread beneath Serafina's ribs. "Buried?" Lucian's jaw tightened faintly. "Yes. You think he helped conceal what happened to Eleanor?" "I think," Lucian said evenly, "that Atticus Wren appears whenever powerful people become nervous." The corridor suddenly felt smaller. The walls closer. Serafina realized with growing unease that tonight had expanded far beyond personal grief. Eleanor's death was not merely a tragedy. It was a secret powerful people had invested years protecting. "And now he wants to see me." Lucian's gaze remained fixed on her. "Yes. Why?" "That," he said quietly, "is what concerns me." They descended the grand staircase together in silence. The winter ball below no longer resembled celebration. Clusters of aristocrats whispered nervously beneath chandeliers while servants moved too quickly between half-finished champagne glasses and abandoned dance cards. The orchestra sat motionless now. No one danced anymore. Conversations died instantly the moment Lucian appeared beside Serafina at the top of the staircase. Fear moved visibly through the ballroom. Not of scandal. Of him. Serafina became painfully aware once again of the white silk wrapped around her body. Of how every noble gaze followed her now with suspicion sharpened into fascination. There she is. Look. Dear God. She truly does resemble the portrait. No wonder the Duke lost control. Lucian heard every whisper. She knew he did. Yet he never slowed. Never acknowledged them. Power radiated from him too naturally for that. As they crossed the ballroom floor toward the West Salon doors, Lady Blackthorne suddenly rose from a velvet chair near the fireplace. A severe woman in emerald silk with sharp aristocratic features and too many diamonds. "Your Grace." Her voice trembled slightly. "I saw her." Lucian stopped. "You saw someone?" "No." Lady Blackthorne's pale eyes darted nervously toward Serafina. "I saw Lady Eleanor standing on the balcony." Murmurs exploded immediately around the ballroom. Serafina felt every stare sharpen toward her. Lady Blackthorne continued before anyone could interrupt. "She was wearing white." Silence. Lucian's face became carved stone. "Describe precisely what you saw." She stood beyond the glass doors overlooking the West Gardens. The woman's voice shook visibly now. "At first I thought it was Miss Vale." Her eyes shifted uneasily toward Serafina again. "But then she disappeared." "Disappeared?" Lucian repeated flatly. "Yes." "Without opening the doors." "Yes." Several nearby women crossed themselves quietly. Aristocrats pretending sophistication suddenly looked very willing to believe in ghosts. Lucian remained entirely expressionless. "You imagined it." "I did not." "You consumed 3 glasses of champagne within an hour." "Lucian," Verona warned softly. "Enough." Lady Blackthorne looked insulted now. "Your Grace, I know what I saw." "No." Lucian's voice lowered dangerously. "You know what fear suggested to you after gossip infected this ballroom." The woman flushed immediately. "I will not be spoken to that way." "Then stop spreading ghost stories in my house." Silence crashed down hard. Nobody defended her. Nobody ever defended themselves successfully against Lucian Ashbourne. Lady Blackthorn sat back down stiffly beneath the weight of public humiliation. Seraphina watched him carefully. He had protected her again. Publicly. Deliberately. The realization settled strangely through her chest. Lucien turned toward the west salon doors. Inside. Seraphina followed him while whispers erupted behind them once more. The west salon felt warmer than the galleries upstairs. Dark green wallpaper. Firelight. Leather chairs. Yet tension poisoned the room immediately. A tall, silver-haired man stood beside the fireplace with a crystal glass untouched in his hand. Lord Atticus Wren. He turned slowly as they entered. Sharp blue eyes settled instantly on Seraphina, then widened. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her. Recognition. Impossible, he murmured softly. Lucien closed the salon doors behind them with controlled force. You requested Miss Vale by name. Atticus never looked away from Seraphina. Yes. Why? A long silence followed. Then Atticus Wren said quietly, because 22 years ago, her mother disappeared after leaving Ashbourne Hall. The world seemed to stop moving. Seraphina stared at him in disbelief. What? Lucien's expression darkened instantly. Explain yourself carefully. Atticus finally tore his gaze away from Seraphina. Her mother's name was Vivian Vale. Seraphina's pulse stumbled violently. How do you know my mother? Because before she married a pastor in Norwich. Atticus swallowed slowly. Vivian Vale was employed here at Ashbourne Hall as Lady Eleanor Whitmore's personal companion. Silence. Absolute. Total. Seraphina felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. No, she whispered immediately. That is impossible. I wish it were. Atticus's voice lowered. Because the last time I saw your mother alive, she was standing beside Lady Eleanor on the west balcony the night Eleanor died. The fire cracked softly in the west salon. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed capable of movement after Atticus Wren's words. Seraphina stood frozen beneath the golden firelight while her pulse thundered unevenly through her chest. Her mother, Ashbourne Hall, Eleanor Whitmore, the west balcony. Every impossible thread from tonight suddenly tangled together around her throat. No, she whispered again. You are mistaken. Atticus looked genuinely tired as he studied her face. I hoped I was. Lucien stepped forward slowly. Dangerous calm settled across his expression once more. You will explain everything. Atticus nodded once. Of course. Begin with why you never mentioned Vivian Vale before tonight. Because I was instructed not to. Verona's eyes narrowed sharply. By whom? A long pause. Your father. Lucien's face hardened instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Seraphina looked between them in confusion. Your father. Lucien's voice lowered dangerously. My father died 3 years ago. Yes. Atticus swallowed carefully. But 6 years ago, the Duke of Ashbourne controlled every detail surrounding Eleanor's death. Verona looked furious now. You are telling me Lucien's father knew Vivian Vale was there that night? Yes. And concealed it? Yes. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Seraphina gripped the edge of a nearby chair because suddenly the room no longer felt stable beneath her feet. Why would my mother need hiding? She asked softly. Atticus looked at her carefully. Because Vivian disappeared the morning after Eleanor died. Disappeared. Completely. Lucien's expression darkened further. I searched for her. Atticus glanced toward him with visible surprise. You never found anything. No, Lucien's jaw tightened. Because apparently my father was burying evidence before sunrise. Verona turned sharply toward Atticus. What exactly happened that night? Atticus exhaled slowly as though reopening a grave inside his own memory. Lady Eleanor attended the ball unexpectedly. Very few people knew she planned to leave her rooms. His gaze shifted toward Seraphina. Vivian accompanied her. Why? Because Eleanor trusted your mother. Seraphina felt something strangely in her chest at that. She barely remembered her mother clearly now. Only soft hands. Lavender soap. A lullaby sung quietly beside winter windows. Continue, Lucien said coldly. Atticus nodded. Near midnight Eleanor received a note requesting she meet someone privately on the west balcony. Lucian's face became carved stone again. The unsigned note. Yes. And Vivian went with her. At first, Atticus hesitated. But according to the servants, Eleanor later asked Vivian to retrieve something from upstairs. Serafina frowned slightly. What? Nobody knows. Atticus looked toward Lucian. By the time Vivian returned, Eleanor was already dead. Silence swallowed the room whole. Serafina looked instinctively toward the dark salon windows overlooking snow-covered gardens beyond Ashbourne Hall. The west balcony. A woman falling through winter darkness while music continued downstairs. The image hurt. What happened to my mother afterward? She asked quietly. Atticus's expression shifted uneasily. That is where the story becomes dangerous. Lucian stepped closer. Meaning the next morning Vivian accused someone publicly inside this house. Verona inhaled sharply. No, yes. Atticus's gaze lowered briefly. She claimed Eleanor did not fall accidentally. Serafina felt her stomach tighten painfully. Who did she accuse? Another long silence. Then softly, your father. Lucian went completely still. Verona closed her eyes briefly as though she had expected the answer and still hated hearing it aloud. Serafina stared at Atticus in disbelief. The former Duke? Yes. That is impossible. It sounded impossible then too. Atticus rubbed slowly at his forehead. The Duke of Ashbourne controlled enormous political influence. Vivian was a companion from a modest family. No one wanted scandal. Lucian's voice dropped lower. And my father denied it. Immediately. Of course he did. Atticus looked at him carefully. Lucian, do not defend him. I am not. A dangerous silence stretched between the two men. Serafina suddenly realized Lucian looked less shocked than furious. As though some buried suspicion had finally found shape tonight. Why would my mother accuse him? She whispered. She claimed she saw an argument between him and Eleanor earlier that evening. Atticus hesitated again. About money. Verona frowned sharply. Money? Eleanor inherited substantial property after her parents died. Atticus's expression darkened. Marriage contracts were complicated. Your father believed certain lands should transfer entirely to the Ashbourne estate after the wedding. Lucian's mouth tightened visibly. Eleanor refused. Yes. Serafina looked toward Lucian slowly. You knew this? No, the answer came instantly. Honest. Sharp. Eleanor handled estate negotiations personally because she distrusted my father's advisors. His gaze turned colder. Apparently with reason. Silence settled heavily again. The firelight flickered across dark wood paneling and crystal glasses, while distant ballroom whispers continued beyond the salon walls. Ashbourne Hall itself seemed to listen. What happened after my mother made the accusation? Serafina asked softly. Atticus exhaled slowly. Your father silenced the situation immediately. Lucian's eyes darkened. How? Officially. Atticus gave a bitter smile. Vivian Vale suffered emotional distress after witnessing Eleanor's death and left the estate voluntarily. And unofficially? Silence. Then quietly, your mother vanished before sunrise. Serafina felt cold spread through her entire body. No, I am sorry. No, she shook her head sharply. My mother married my father in Norwich. She raised me. She was not missing. Atticus studied her face carefully. When did she die? When I was 12. From illness. Yes. Another silence. Strange this time. Heavy with realization. Atticus slowly sat down beside the fireplace as though his knees suddenly weakened beneath him. Dear God. Lucian's attention sharpened instantly. What? Atticus looked toward Serafina. Vivian disappeared 22 years ago. Her pulse stumbled violently. Yes. And you are 22. Silence crashed through the salon. Verona stared at Serafina openly now. Lucian's expression did not change at all. That frightened her most because she could feel how intensely he was thinking behind the stillness. Say what you mean, he said quietly to Atticus. The older man swallowed carefully. Vivian vanished from Ashbourne Hall already pregnant. The world tilted sideways. Serafina actually took a step backward before she realized it. No, her voice came barely audible now. No, Atticus looked devastated. We believed she fled England entirely. You are saying my mother was pregnant while working here? Yes. Lucian's gaze sharpened dangerously. Did anyone know who the father was? Silence again. Atticus did not answer quickly enough. Verona stared at him in disbelief. Atticus. He looked toward Lucian slowly, carefully. There were rumors. Lucian's face became terrifyingly calm. What rumors? That Vivian and Eleanor were protecting someone. Serafina could barely breathe now. Protecting who? Atticus's voice lowered almost to a whisper. You! The room went dead silent. Lucian did not move, did not blink. Firelight flickered across his face while snow drifted beyond the dark windows outside. Serafina stared between them in complete disbelief. That is absurd. Nobody answered, which made it worse. No, she whispered again. No, my father was a pastor. Yes, Atticus said softly. The man who raised you was. Lucian finally spoke. Quiet, controlled, dangerous enough to cut glass. You believe Serafina is my daughter? No, Atticus looked genuinely shaken now. I believe your father believed it. Silence. Absolute. Terrible. Serafina felt her knees weaken beneath her. Lucian reached for her automatically before she could fall. One strong hand steadied her elbow instantly. Warm, steady, protective. She hated how much comfort the contact gave her. That is impossible, she whispered. Lucian's gaze remained fixed on Atticus. Explain. Vivian and Eleanor became close during the engagement season. Atticus rubbed slowly at his face. There were whispers Eleanor suspected your father intended to disinherit you after the marriage. Verona inhaled sharply. Oh my God! Lucian's hand tightened slightly against Serafina's arm. Continue. Then suddenly Vivian became pregnant. Atticus's voice lowered further. And Eleanor began fighting aggressively to protect your inheritance rights. Serafina's pulse thundered painfully. Why would she do that? Atticus looked directly at her. Because according to the rumors, another terrible pause. Vivian claimed you were not the former Duke's child. Silence. Then Lucian asked the question none of them wanted answered. Whose child did she claim? Atticus stared directly into Lucian Ashbourne's eyes beside the firelight and said quietly, Yours. The fire snapped sharply in the silence that followed. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Serafina stood completely still beneath the warm salon light while the world around her quietly shattered into pieces too impossible to hold. Yours. The word echoed through her chest with terrifying force. Lucian's child. No, could not exist inside reality. Lucian Ashbourne was 34 years old. Powerful. Untouchable. Cold as winter stone. She had met him only hours ago beneath chandeliers and scandal and white silk. Yet suddenly the room felt filled with invisible threads binding them together long before tonight began. No, she whispered faintly. No, Atticus Wren looked exhausted now, older somehow beneath the firelight. I warned Vivian the rumors would destroy her. Stop, Serafina said immediately. Please stop speaking as though any of this is true. Lucian had not released her arm. She realized it only when his hand tightened slightly at her elbow, grounding her before she fell completely apart. Serafina. Her name sounded different in his voice now. Softer. More dangerous. She stepped away from him instantly. Do not. Lucian went still. Do not what? Do not say my name like that. Her pulse thundered painfully through her chest. You cannot possibly believe this. Lucian's expression became unreadable again. I believe someone spent 22 years hiding something. That does not mean it is true. No, his voice remained calm. But it means we ask questions instead of dismissing possibilities because they frighten us. Verona stepped forward sharply. Enough. Everyone looked toward her. For the first time tonight, Lady Verona Blackwell appeared genuinely shaken beneath her polished elegance. We are standing inside a locked salon discussing whether the Duke of Ashbourne unknowingly fathered a child with a companion 22 years ago, while his fiancée later died under suspicious circumstances. Her voice tightened visibly. Do any of you understand how catastrophic this becomes if it reaches society? Atticus laughed softly without humor. Society already smells blood. The words landed hard. Outside the salon doors, muffled ballroom whispers still drifted faintly through the estate halls. The winter ball had transformed into a feeding frenzy hours ago. Aristocrats would spend months devouring tonight's scandal. Serafina suddenly felt sick. My father. Her voice came small now, fragile. The man who raised me loved my mother. Lucien's gaze shifted toward her instantly. I know. No, tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes. You do not. She looked away toward the dark windows. Snow drifted beyond the glass beneath moonlight silvering the frozen estate grounds. He taught scripture every Sunday in a church barely large enough for 40 people. He repaired broken chairs himself because the parish could not afford replacements. He carried my mother to bed when she became ill because she could no longer climb the stairs alone. Her throat tightened painfully. Do not turn him into a lie. Silence settled heavily through the salon. Lucien looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I am not questioning the man who raised you. His voice lowered carefully. I am questioning why your mother hid from Ashbourne Hall after Eleanor died. Serafina closed her eyes briefly, because that question terrified her too now. Atticus moved slowly toward the fireplace. Vivian disappeared before dawn. No farewell. No explanation. Only gone. And you allowed that? Lucien asked coldly. I was not the Duke. No, Lucien's gray eyes sharpened dangerously. You were merely the man cleaning up his scandals. Verona exhaled sharply. Lucien. He knew. The Duke's voice remained frighteningly calm. All these years he knew Vivian existed. Atticus finally looked angry too. You think I enjoyed burying what happened here? I think you obeyed my father. Because men like your father destroyed anyone who refused them. The silence afterward hurt. Serafina watched Lucien carefully now. The accusation struck him somewhere deep beneath the iron restraint. I am not him, he said quietly. Atticus's expression softened immediately. No. Then stop looking at me like you expect history to repeat itself. Another painful silence. Verona crossed slowly toward Serafina then. Sit down before you faint. I am not going to faint. You are white as the snow outside. Serafina sank into the velvet chair anyway because suddenly standing required too much strength. The room blurred faintly around the edges from exhaustion and shock and too many impossible revelations colliding at once. Lucien remained standing near the fireplace. Tall, still, entirely composed except for the tension visible in his hands. There is another problem, Atticus said quietly. Nobody liked the sound of that sentence. What now? Verona asked. Atticus looked toward Serafina carefully. If Vivian believed Lucien was your father, then Eleanor almost certainly knew too. Lucien's expression hardened. Continue. Eleanor spent the final weeks before her death rewriting portions of her marriage contract. Verona frowned sharply. Why? Atticus hesitated. Because she intended to secure legal protection for Vivian and the child after the wedding. Silence crashed through the salon again. Serafina stared at him in disbelief. Why would she do that? Atticus's eyes lowered briefly. Because Eleanor Whitmore loved Lucien enough to protect his mistakes. The words struck harder than intended. Lucien actually flinched. Tiny movement, barely visible. But Serafina saw it. No, he said quietly. Eleanor would never. She knew about Vivian. No, Lucien. Atticus sighed heavily. She confronted Vivian herself. The fire crackled softly between them. Serafina's pulse quickened again. My mother knew Lady Eleanor personally. Very personally. Atticus nodded once. At first Eleanor was furious. Then, another hesitation. Something changed. Lucien's voice lowered dangerously. What changed? Vivian insisted you never knew about the pregnancy. Silence. Then softly. Because it happened before your engagement became official. Serafina felt her breath catch painfully. Lucien closed his eyes once. Briefly. Like a man absorbing a blow silently. I never touched Vivian, he said quietly. Atticus frowned slightly. What? Lucien's eyes opened again. Cold. Certain. I never had any relationship with her. Silence. Absolute. Verona stared at him sharply. Lucien. I am telling the truth. The room shifted instantly. Serafina felt confusion crash violently through her exhaustion. Then why would my mother claim? I do not know. Frustration cracked faintly through Lucien's composure for the first time tonight. I knew Vivian existed. Of course I did. She attended Eleanor constantly during the engagement season. But that was all. Atticus looked genuinely stunned now. She specifically named you. Then she lied. Or protected someone. Verona whispered suddenly. Everyone turned toward her. She looked pale beneath the firelight now. Thoughtful. Frightened. What if Vivian accused Lucien because the truth was worse? Silence followed immediately. Serafina's stomach tightened. Worse how? Verona looked slowly toward Lucien. Then toward the dark salon windows. If the former duke believed the child threatened inheritance rights. Her voice lowered carefully. Then perhaps Vivian attached Lucien's name deliberately because she feared the real father. Cold spread through the room like spilled ink. Lucien's face changed instantly. Terrifyingly. No, Atticus stared at Verona. You think. I think powerful men often silence inconvenient women. She looked toward Serafina with visible unease. And I think Vivian may have chosen the only name capable of protecting her child afterward. Serafina stopped breathing. No. The implication moved through the salon before anyone spoke it aloud. Lucien's father. The former duke. No, Lucien said again, sharper this time. Absolutely not. Yet something in his face betrayed him. Fear. Real fear. Atticus sat heavily beside the fireplace. Dear God. Serafina felt suddenly cold despite the firelight warming the room. Her mother. Her quiet, gentle mother with lavender soap and trembling hands near the end. Hidden inside this monstrous history all along. There is more, Atticus said quietly. Nobody wanted more. He continued anyway. 2 days before Eleanor died, she changed her will. Lucien looked up sharply. What? She added a sealed provision. Atticus swallowed carefully. One involving Vivian and the unborn child. Silence. Then Lucien asked softly, Where is that document now? Atticus looked directly at him. Missing. The salon went still again. Serafina stared toward the fire while realization spread slowly through her chest like winter frost. Missing portrait. Missing will. Missing truths buried beneath 6 years of silence. Someone had not merely hidden Eleanor's death. Someone had dismantled the evidence piece by piece afterward. Lucien moved toward the windows abruptly, staring out into the snow-covered darkness beyond Ashbourne Hall. Someone reopened this tonight for a reason. Verona nodded slowly. Yes. Not because of ghosts. No, Lucien's reflection stood dark against the glass. Powerful. Haunted. Furious now in ways that frightened even the room itself. Someone believes Serafina's existence threatens them. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Then Serafina whispered the question none of them truly wanted answered. What if they are right? The question remained hanging in the salon long after Serafina spoke it aloud. What if they are right? Snow drifted beyond the tall windows of Ashbourne Hall while the fire burned lower inside the grate, casting restless shadows across dark wood walls and exhausted faces. Nobody answered immediately because every person in the room understood the danger beneath the question. If Serafina truly carried some hidden claim connected to the Ashbourne family, then tonight's terror was not random. It was strategy. Lucien turned slowly away from the window. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face and the exhaustion buried beneath his composure. Then someone spent 22 years trying to erase you. The words landed softly, brutally. Serafina stared at him in silence. Erase you. The phrase cut deeper than fear because suddenly her entire life looked different through it. The tiny church in Norwich. The quiet cottage. Her mother refusing to speak about the past. The careful isolation that once seemed ordinary now felt constructed. Intentional. No, she whispered faintly. My mother would never lie to me. Parents lie constantly to protect children, Verona said quietly. Especially frightened ones. Serafina looked toward her sharply. You speak as though you understand. A strange sadness crossed Verona's expression. I do. Silence followed. Lucien crossed slowly back toward the center of the salon. We proceed carefully from this point forward. Atticus laughed bitterly near the fireplace. Carefully? Yes. Lucien's gray eyes hardened. Because if someone feared Serafina enough to reopen Eleanor's death tonight, then panic becomes exactly what they want. And what exactly do you think they want? Verona asked. Lucien looked toward Serafina. Access. Cold moved slowly through the room. Serafina frowned slightly. Access to what? To you. Why? Perhaps to determine what your mother told you before she died. Nothing. Her voice came sharper now. My mother never spoke about Ashbourne Hall, or Eleanor Whitmore, or any of this. Lucien watched her carefully. Are you certain? Yes. She hesitated briefly. Although. Everyone in the room stilled instantly. Although what? Atticus asked. Serafina frowned faintly, searching through memory. Near the end, when she became very ill, her voice softened involuntarily. Sometimes she confused dreams with conversations. Lucien stepped closer. What did she say? I thought it was nonsense. Serafina shook her head slowly. She kept apologizing to someone named Ellie. Silence. Complete. Verona closed her eyes briefly. Atticus muttered something under his breath. Lucien's face changed instantly. Eleanor. What? Only family called her Ellie. The salon seemed to contract around them. Serafina's pulse quickened painfully again. There is more. Lucien's voice lowered. Tell me. She looked away toward the fire because suddenly memory hurt. One night she woke screaming during a storm. Her fingers tightened unconsciously against the velvet armrest. She kept saying she should not have left her alone on the balcony. Silence crashed hard through the room. Atticus sat down heavily. Verona looked pale beneath the firelight. Lucien did not move at all. You never mentioned this before? He asked softly. Because I did not understand it. Serafina's throat tightened painfully. I thought fever damaged her mind. Lucien looked away abruptly toward the dark windows again. No, his voice sounded distant now. Fractured. It damaged her silence. Nobody spoke after that. The truth moved quietly through the salon now. Vivian Vale had not forgotten Ashbourne Hall. She had carried it until death. Serafina suddenly felt grief rising unexpectedly beneath her ribs. Not only for Eleanor. For her mother too. For all the years she spent hiding terror inside ordinary life. There is another possibility, Verona said quietly. Lucien's gaze sharpened immediately. Meaning, if Vivian truly believed someone murdered Eleanor. Verona folded her hands tightly together. Then perhaps she did not disappear simply to protect the child. Her eyes shifted toward Serafina carefully. Perhaps she fled because she believed they would kill her next. Cold silence swallowed the room whole. Serafina stopped breathing for one terrible second. Lucien's expression darkened dangerously. Who knew about the pregnancy? Atticus answered immediately. Very few people. Names. Vivian. Eleanor. Your father. He hesitated. And me. Verona frowned sharply. No servants. Rumors only. Lucien paced slowly toward the fireplace now. Restless energy moved beneath his restraint for the first time all night. Someone removed Eleanor's portrait tonight. Yes. Someone carved not her beneath the frame. Yes. And someone wanted Serafina publicly associated with Eleanor before revealing Vivian's connection to this house. Lucien stopped moving. That is not random. Atticus nodded grimly. No, Serafina suddenly realized something horrible. The ballroom. Everyone looked toward her. What? She swallowed carefully. The white dress. Her pulse quickened. What if that was not an accident either? Silence. Lucien stared at her. Explain. Lady Beatrice's maid unpacked my trunk after we arrived. Serafina frowned as memory sharpened unexpectedly. I distinctly remember placing the gray dress on top before dinner. Verona's eyes widened slowly. But you wore white. Because when I dressed tonight, the white gown had been laid across the bed already prepared. Cold moved visibly through the room. Atticus muttered another curse beneath his breath. Lucien went terrifyingly still. Someone chose the dress for you. Yes. Serafina's voice lowered faintly. And I never questioned it because I assumed the staff misunderstood my instructions. Lucien's jaw tightened sharply. Find Lady Beatrice's maid. he ordered immediately toward the servant near the door. Now. Yes, Your Grace. The servant hurried out at once. Verona stared toward Serafina with growing unease. Someone wanted the ballroom to see Eleanor reborn. No, Lucian corrected softly. Someone wanted me to see her. The honesty of the statement settled heavily between them. Serafina looked at him carefully now. At the exhaustion buried beneath his composure. At the grief that still lived inside him after 6 years. He had been manipulated tonight too. Not only her. Lucian. Verona's voice softened unexpectedly. This was never about ghosts. No, his gaze remained fixed somewhere distant beyond the firelight. It was about memory. Silence stretched. Then suddenly a loud knock struck the salon doors hard enough to startle everyone. Lucian's expression hardened instantly. Enter. The doors opened quickly. Mrs. Pembroke hurried inside pale-faced and breathless beneath her black housekeeper's uniform. Your Grace. What happened? One of the upstairs maids is missing. The room went silent immediately. Which maid? Lucian asked softly. Mrs. Pembroke swallowed hard. The girl assigned to unpack Miss Vale's things. Serafina felt ice move slowly through her chest. Lucian's voice lowered dangerously. When was she last seen? Approximately 30 minutes ago, near the north corridor. Mrs. Pembroke's hands trembled visibly now. She appeared frightened, sir. Frightened of what? She kept repeating that she should never have touched the white dress. Silence crashed through the salon. Lucian looked toward Serafina immediately. Did she say anything else? Mrs. Pembroke hesitated. Yes. Speak. The older woman swallowed carefully. She said someone paid her to make sure Miss Vale entered the ballroom looking exactly like Lady Eleanor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Serafina whispered the question already terrifying all of them. Who paid her? Mrs. Pembroke looked toward Lucian with visible fear. She would not say. Lucian's face became carved stone. Find her. We are trying, Your Grace. No, his voice cut sharply through the salon. You are searching quietly. I am ordering every servant in this house awake until she is found. Yes, sir. Mrs. Pembroke hurried out again. The moment the doors closed, Atticus looked toward Lucian grimly. They are cleaning evidence. Lucian nodded once slowly. Yes. Which means whoever orchestrated tonight still believes the girl knows something dangerous. Serafina rose from the chair despite exhaustion pulling at her body. I do not know anything. Perhaps not consciously, Verona said softly. But memory survives in strange ways. Lucian's eyes lifted toward her. What are you suggesting? Verona hesitated briefly. Children remember more than adults realize. Serafina frowned. I was an infant. Yes. Verona's expression tightened. But your mother was not. Silence followed. Lucian suddenly crossed toward a writing desk near the salon wall. He unlocked the bottom drawer with deliberate movements and removed an old leather folder thick with age. Atticus stared immediately. You kept them. Every report. Lucian carried the folder back toward the firelight. Every witness statement from Eleanor's death. Serafina watched him carefully as he opened the documents. His hands remained steady. Only his eyes betrayed the storm beneath the surface now. He scanned several pages quickly before stopping abruptly. Silence stretched. Verona stepped closer. What is it? Lucian looked slowly up from the papers. His face had gone pale again. Vivian gave a statement the night Eleanor died. Atticus frowned sharply. That was destroyed. Apparently not. Lucian's gaze shifted toward Serafina. And according to this document, before disappearing from Ashbourne Hall, his voice lowered dangerously. Your mother claimed Eleanor told her she had hidden proof somewhere inside this estate. The room froze. Serafina's pulse thundered violently. Proof of what? Lucian looked directly into her eyes beside the dying firelight. Who killed her? The salon fell into complete silence after Lucian spoke the words aloud. Proof of who killed her. The fire burned low behind them now, shadows moving restlessly across the walls of Ashbourne Hall, while winter wind whispered against the tall windows overlooking the frozen grounds. Serafina stared at the old document in Lucian's hand as though it might suddenly explain her entire life. Her mother knew. Eleanor knew. And someone had spent 22 years making certain the truth remained buried beneath titles and silence and fear. Where? Verona asked quietly. Lucien's gaze remained fixed on the paper. Vivian's statement says Eleanor hid the evidence somewhere only Lucien would understand. Atticus frowned sharply. That makes no sense. No, Lucien's voice lowered slightly. It makes perfect sense. Everyone looked toward him. Something had changed in his expression. Not merely anger now. Memory. Eleanor hated obvious hiding places, he said quietly. She believed secrets survived longer when hidden inside sentiment. Serafina watched him carefully. You know where she would hide something. Perhaps. He closed the leather folder slowly. Or perhaps I knew her once and spent 6 years trying unsuccessfully to forget. The honesty hurt the room again. Verona stepped closer beside the fireplace. Lucien. No, he looked toward the salon doors. If Eleanor left evidence inside this estate, then tonight was not about haunting Ashbourne Hall. His gray eyes sharpened dangerously. It was about stopping us from finding it. Atticus nodded grimly. The missing portrait. A distraction. The ballroom panic. Another distraction. Lucien's attention shifted slowly toward Serafina. And the white dress. Silence stretched between them. She understood before he spoke again. They needed me emotionally compromised. The words landed softly, true enough to ache. Serafina looked away first because suddenly the room felt too intimate, too dangerous. Lucien Ashbourne had spent 6 years entombed inside grief. Tonight someone deliberately reopened that wound using her face and her mother's secrets. Yet despite all the manipulation, despite all the ghosts surrounding them, he had protected her at every turn. Publicly, repeatedly, the realization settled painfully through her chest. A sudden knock struck the salon doors again. Hard. Urgent. Lucien straightened immediately. Enter. Mrs. Pembroke hurried back inside pale with alarm. Your Grace. Tell me. We found the maid. Silence. Alive? Lucien asked sharply. Yes, sir. Relief flickered briefly through the room before the housekeeper continued. But she is terrified. Where is she now? In the servants' quarters. Mrs. Pembroke swallowed carefully. She claims someone threatened her family if she spoke. Lucien's face hardened instantly. Who? She does not know. No, Mrs. Pembroke's voice trembled faintly. But she described the person who paid her. Serafina's pulse quickened. Who was it? The housekeeper looked directly toward Lady Verona Blackwell. She said the woman wore dark red velvet and emerald earrings. Silence exploded through the salon. Verona froze completely. Atticus stared at her in disbelief. Serafina felt the air vanish from the room. Lucien's expression became unreadable. Verona. Lady Verona looked genuinely stunned. No, you wore dark red velvet tonight. Half the women in England own red velvet. Emerald earrings? Atticus asked quietly. Verona reached instinctively toward her throat. Emeralds glittered coldly against her pale skin beneath the firelight. This is absurd. Lucien stepped closer slowly. Calm. Terrifyingly calm. Did you instruct the maid to prepare the white dress? No. Did you know Eleanor's portrait would disappear tonight? No. Did you know Atticus intended to reveal Vivian's connection to Ashbourne Hall? Verona's composure cracked visibly for the first time all evening. I did not orchestrate this. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Serafina watched her carefully now. Earlier Verona frightened her. Cold elegance. Sharp intelligence. But beneath the fear tonight there was something else too. Grief. Old grief carried quietly for years beside Lucien's. Lucien, Verona whispered softly. You cannot possibly believe I would hurt Eleanor. The Duke's gaze remained fixed on her. I do not know what to believe anymore. The answer devastated her visibly. Serafina saw it happen in real time. A woman who had spent years standing beside a grieving man suddenly realizing he no longer trusted anyone completely. Verona looked away sharply toward the windows. I loved her too. Lucien's face tightened faintly. Tiny movement. Real pain. I know. Do you? She laughed softly without humor. Because for 6 years you locked yourself inside this mausoleum, while the rest of us learned how to survive around your grief. Silence. Then softly, I stayed. The words hit harder than anger. Lucien looked at her carefully. Yes. Everyone else moved on. Her voice trembled now despite obvious efforts to control it. I did not. Serafina suddenly understood. Verona Blackwell loved him. Not dramatically. Not selfishly. Quietly. Patiently. Like someone standing beside winter hoping eventually spring might return. And tonight Serafina arrived wearing white. Lucien seemed to understand the realization crossing Serafina's face, because his expression darkened immediately. Verona. No, she straightened sharply. Do not pity me. I hate pity. I was not offering it. Good. Her composure returned slowly beneath practiced aristocratic elegance. Because I am not ashamed of loving someone incapable of noticing it. Silence swallowed the room whole. Even Atticus looked away awkwardly. Serafina's chest tightened unexpectedly. Not jealousy. Sadness. Verona deserved better than 6 years of standing beside a ghost. Lucien finally spoke softly. You should have left. Verona smiled faintly. Brokenly. Perhaps. Before anyone could continue, another realization struck Serafina sharply. Wait. Everyone turned toward her. She looked toward Verona carefully. If you did not arrange the dress. Her pulse quickened. Then someone deliberately wanted suspicion pointed toward you. Atticus straightened immediately. Of course. Lucien's expression sharpened dangerously. They needed division inside the house. Verona looked toward Serafina slowly. Something shifted in her face then. Respect perhaps. You are smarter than they expected. Serafina ignored the compliment. If someone wanted us fighting each other, then whoever orchestrated tonight is still close enough to watch the chaos unfold. Silence followed. Lucien suddenly crossed toward the salon doors. No one leaves Ashbourne Hall. Lucien. Verona frowned sharply. The guests. Remain until morning. His voice lowered dangerously. And every corridor inside this estate is searched immediately. For what? Atticus asked. Lucien looked toward the old leather folder still resting beside the fireplace. For whatever Eleanor hid. The search began within minutes. Servants carrying lanterns moved through darkened corridors, while frightened aristocrats whispered together inside locked guest chambers upstairs. Snow continued falling heavily beyond the estate windows, burying the grounds in white silence. Serafina followed Lucien through the eastern wing once more because somehow neither of them could tolerate distance now. The morning gallery looked colder after midnight. Emptier. The missing portrait frame still hung beneath candlelight like an open wound carved into the wall. Lucien stopped beside it slowly. Eleanor once told me something strange here. Serafina looked toward him. What? She said people always hide the truth inside the thing they fear losing most. His gaze drifted toward the empty frame. At the time I thought she meant love. And now? Lucien's eyes shifted toward her. Now I think she meant memory. Silence settled softly between them. Not painful this time. Heavy. Intimate. Serafina suddenly became deeply aware of how alone they were in the corridor. Just candlelight and winter shadows and 6 years of unfinished grief standing quietly between them. Lucien. The name escaped before she thought better of it. He looked at her immediately. Something dangerous moved through his expression hearing his given name in her voice. You should not say it like that. Like what? Softly. Heat rose unexpectedly into her cheeks. I was not aware I said it softly. You did. Silence stretched again. Then quietly, you are not him. Lucien frowned slightly. What? Serafina looked toward the empty frame. Your father. His face changed instantly. She continued before fear stopped her. You keep punishing yourself for what happened to Eleanor. But every person who knew her speaks about your grief with certainty. Her gray eyes lifted toward his steadily. No one speaks about your cruelty that way. Lucien stared at her for one long, unbearable moment. Serafina. Her name sounded almost painful in his voice now. Then suddenly something caught the candlelight near the bottom corner of the empty frame. A tiny metal glint half hidden behind carved wood molding. Lucien saw it simultaneously. Instantly he crossed toward the wall and pressed carefully against the inner frame edge. A hidden compartment clicked open with a soft mechanical sound. Silence crashed through the gallery. Inside the compartment rested a sealed envelope yellowed with age. Eleanor's handwriting curled elegantly across the front. For Lucien. Neither moved for one terrible heartbeat. Then Lucien reached slowly into the compartment and removed the letter with trembling fingers. The first visible tremor Serafina had seen from him all night. "Open it," she whispered softly. Lucien stared at the envelope beneath flickering candlelight. Snow rattled faintly against the gallery windows. Somewhere deep inside Ashbourne Hall, a clock struck 2 in the morning. Then finally, carefully, Lucien broke the seal. Inside rested a single folded page and a silver key. His eyes scanned the letter once, twice. All color disappeared from his face immediately. "What?" Serafina asked. Lucien looked slowly up at her. Shock, grief, fury, something else too. Relief so painful it nearly broke him open where he stood. Eleanor knew. His voice came barely audible now. "Knew what?" He swallowed hard. Then quietly, "My father killed her."